Hi and welcome. I'm Midnight Truth, and it's so nice to have you here tonight, wherever you are right now, whether you're in bed, lying on the couch, or just looking for a quiet moment. I want you to know this time is for you. Take a deep breath in, and as you breathe out, feel the weight of the day start to fade. Let your mind settle, let your body relax, and let yourself simply be. There's no rush, no pressure, just this calm, quiet moment. If you'd like, you can close your eyes and imagine yourself in a peaceful place. Maybe it's a cozy room with soft, warm lighting. Or maybe it's under a starry sky, with a gentle breeze brushing against you. Wherever you feel safe and calm, let yourself drift there. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time is it there? Tonight's story is gentle and soothing, perfect to carry you into a deep, restful sleep. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. I was used to new beginnings. Divorce had a way of making everything feel new, even when it wasn't. The house was a modest two-story, weathered but sturdy, tucked in the corner of a quiet street in a town that felt like it had no past. The kind of place where people came to disappear. I hadn't planned on moving here, but the city apartment was too small, too loud, too full of memories. This house was different, empty and silent. When I first saw it, I knew this was a place to start over. The floorboards creaked with every step, a little like the way my bones felt when I climbed out of bed in the mornings, old, stiff, but somehow still moving. There was a musty smell that clung to the air, the scent of years lived in but not loved. I opened the windows, hoping the smell would dissipate. It didn't. At first, I chalked it up to the house being old. The landlord had told me the place was built back in the 1920s. Maybe it was the kind of house that carried its history in strange ways. Things that seemed odd but weren't really all that strange, right? One afternoon, as I was unpacking in the living room, an older man came by. He lived next door, a little on the quiet side, but he gave me a nod as he leaned against the fence separating our yards. "Noticed you moved in. You're in the old Carver place." He said it like the name should have meant something. "The Carver place?" I repeated, frowning as I paused in my unpacking. "Yeah." He scratched his head, eyeing the house like it was some old animal he wasn't sure about. "Well, it's not really the name, but the last people who lived here were the Carvers. They didn't last long. Place has a way of, well, getting to people. Getting to people?" I asked, curiosity piqued. The man shrugged, a quick, dismissive movement. "Strange things. People used to say they heard stuff at night, like someone was walking around upstairs when no one was home. Others, well, the Carvers left in a hurry. Said they heard footsteps, things moving around. Weird stuff." My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to laugh. Old houses, right? They creak. Could be anything. The neighbor gave me a long, searching look before turning to go. "Yeah, that's what they say." But it wasn't what I thought. It wasn't just creaks. There was something off about this place, and it wasn't long before I began to hear it. The first night, I tried to ignore the sounds. It was just the house settling, I told myself. The wind outside made the old windows rattle. The floorboards groaned as if they were complaining about the weight of the world. I had lived in enough old places to know that these things weren't anything to worry about. But there was something different about this house. The air was thick, colder than it should have been for a summer evening. As I unpacked more boxes, the coldness grew, creeping up my spine, making the back of my neck prickle. I tried to shake it off, to focus on organizing the kitchen, but the strange sensations kept pulling at me, like fingers brushing my skin. That night, I fell into bed, the weight of the day's work making me exhausted enough to sleep despite the unsettling atmosphere. But sleep didn't come easy. I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by a sound, a deep, heavy thud, like someone had dropped a weight on the floor above me. I sat up, heart pounding, but the house was silent again, save for the distant sound of wind howling against the windows. Maybe it was an animal, I thought. Maybe the house was just old. I tried to lay back down, but then I heard it again, this time slower, deliberate steps creaking along the floor. Someone walking, but not with the light shuffle of a person moving through a house. These were heavy, purposeful steps. I held my breath. The sound stopped. Seconds passed, and I waited, straining my ears. Nothing. Then, a faint whisper. It was so soft, so barely there, but it was unmistakable. A voice. Not mine. Not anyone I knew. I could hear the words. Barely. Get out. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was as if the air had turned to stone. Slowly, I sat up, my hands trembling, and looked around the room. Nothing had changed. There were no shadows in the corners, no flicker of movement. It was just quiet. The next few days, I told myself I was imagining things. Old houses had their quirks, their sounds. Maybe I was just jumpy from the stress of the move, the divorce. I was alone in a new place. Of course, I was hearing things, but that night was different. I couldn't explain it away so easily. I had to get some sleep, so I curled up in bed again, trying to ignore the unsettled feeling in my stomach. The silence seemed to suffocate me, and yet I couldn't shake the sense that something or someone was watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was alive. Not in the way that houses sometimes feel full of life because of the people who live in them, but in the opposite way. It was as if the house was watching me, waiting for something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The noises persisted. At first, I tried to dismiss them. Old houses had their creaks and groans, right? But as the days passed, the house seemed to grow louder, more insistent. I'd be in the kitchen, unpacking a box of dishes, and the floorboards above me would creak, followed by a soft scraping sound, like nails dragged along wood. I'd freeze, stare at the ceiling and wait. But nothing ever came. One morning, I went into the bathroom, and I noticed something odd. The air was colder than usual. Not just a little bit. I could see my breath, faintly, like it was the dead of winter. But the heater was on, the radiator hissing away in the corner. I touched the tiles on the floor, and they were freezing. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was just a draft from the window, but it didn't make sense. The windows were shut tight. That night, I decided to investigate. I knew it was probably nothing. The house was old, and I was getting paranoid. But the strange coldness was something I couldn't dismiss anymore. I started in the living room. I stood still for a moment, trying to listen. There was a low hum, almost like the house itself was breathing. I walked around the room, my feet making small, hesitant steps on the creaky floorboards, and suddenly I felt it, a cold draft, so intense that it made me shiver. It came from the corner, near the old armchair. I slowly approached, my hand brushing against the wall as I moved. The closer I got, the colder it became, until it felt like I was walking into a freezer. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I bent down to touch the floor, my fingers trembling as they hovered just above the wood. And that's when I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, but clear enough to make my stomach churn. Leave. I jerked back, heart hammering in my chest. But when I looked around, the room was empty. Just the stillness of the night, the quiet hum of the old house, the cold air pressing in around me. I couldn't stand it anymore. I turned and hurried out of the room, practically running to the stairs. The feeling of being watched hadn't left me, and now it was stronger, like invisible eyes were following every movement I made. That night, I tried to sleep, but the cold spots seemed to follow me, creeping into the corners of every room I went to. I wrapped myself in blankets, but it didn't help. The air was too cold, the whispers too close, and the feeling of something lurking in the shadows too real. I couldn't escape it, and I knew deep down that this wasn't just my mind playing tricks. Something in this house wanted me to feel it, to know it, to be afraid of it. The more time I spent in this house, the more I felt it, the weight of something heavy and dark, something that didn't belong. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but with each passing day, I couldn't escape the growing sense that the house wasn't just creaking and groaning from age. It was alive in a way I didn't understand, pulling me deeper into its grip. I couldn't ignore the whispers anymore. I needed to know what was happening, needed answers. So I began to search. It started in the attic. I hadn't thought to look up there before, but one evening, after hearing the footsteps above my head again, so loud, so real that they shook the floor, I decided to investigate. The attic door was hidden behind a heavy wooden panel in the hallway, and it was stuck. I had to pry it open, the old hinges groaning in protest. When I finally stepped inside, the air was musty, thick with dust. It was as though the attic hadn't been disturbed in years. The floorboards creaked beneath me as I moved forward, the smell of mildew hanging in the air. My flashlight flickered, and I cursed under my breath, smacking it against my palm until the beam steadied. The space was cluttered with old furniture, chairs draped in faded sheets, stacks of cardboard boxes filled with forgotten belongings. But there was one thing that caught my eye, hidden behind a pile of old books and broken frames. A small wooden chest, carved with strange symbols that seemed familiar but I couldn't quite place. I approached it slowly, my hands cold and trembling as I ran my fingers over the rough surface. The chest was locked, but something inside me, something dark, urged me to open it. I found a key buried in a drawer nearby, covered in dust, old and rusty. It fit perfectly. Inside the chest was a leather-bound journal. The pages were yellowed with age, and the writing was neat, but faded in places as if time itself was erasing it. I opened it carefully, and the first page sent a chill down my spine. May 18th, 1924. I've begun the rituals. The house responds. Asterisk at asterisk responds. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the cryptic entries. The owner of the house, a man named Alexander Carver, had been obsessed with the occult, with unlocking things that should never have been touched. The journal detailed his experiments, strange rites and rituals meant to open doors to other worlds, other realities. There were mentions of calling, of entities, of whispers in the walls. As I read, the air around me grew heavier, colder. Carver's last entry, dated just a few days before he left the house abruptly, was what froze me in place. Something has followed me. It watches. I hear it when I sleep, feel it when I wake. It is not of this world. I have opened the door too far. It will not let me go. I shut the journal with a snap, my heart pounding in my chest. The temperature in the attic had dropped even more, and I could see my breath in the air. I was no longer alone in that room. Something, someone was standing just behind me, breathing softly, their presence like a shadow in the corner of my eye. I turned sharply, but the attic was empty. The eerie coldness remained, a suffocating presence that seemed to draw the air out of my lungs. I rushed out of the attic, slamming the door shut behind me, and leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. My hands shook and my mind raced. Carver's journal. He had opened something, a door, a connection to something dark, something that had been waiting. I knew I had to leave the house, but the house wasn't done with me yet. I couldn't sleep after finding the journal. I thought about it all night, the heavy weight of Carver's words pressing down on me. He had opened something, and it was still here, in the walls, in the floors, waiting. The next morning, the house felt different. The air was thick and suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on me. The footsteps, the ones I'd been hearing every night, were no longer confined to the upper floors. Now, they followed me around the house. I tried to go about my day as usual. I unpacked, cleaned, tried to make the house feel like home. But every time I moved into a new room, I'd hear it, soft, slow footsteps behind me, always just a little too far away for me to see anything. When I'd turn to look, there would be nothing, just the same empty space. I couldn't explain it away anymore. These were no ordinary sounds. These were footsteps, and whoever or whatever was making them was walking with me. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. I stepped outside and walked around the house, taking in the surrounding woods. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that stretched across the yard. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed down on you. It was unsettling. As I turned to head back inside, I heard a voice. Leaving so soon? I jumped, my heart racing, and looked around, but there was no one there, not a soul in sight. I quickly brushed it off as a wind. Maybe a neighbor had said something, but I hadn't heard them clearly. When I entered the house, the feeling of being watched intensified. I tried to shake it off, but as I walked through the living room, I heard it again. The sound of footsteps, closer this time. So close that they were almost on top of me. I spun around, eyes wide, searching for the source. Nothing. The footsteps stopped. And then, as if on cue, I heard the soft scraping sound, like nails on wood. It was coming from the hallway, directly above me. I stood frozen, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The feeling of being watched was unbearable now. It was like something was right there, just behind me, waiting to make its move. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out of the house. But as I turned to leave, the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang, the force of it rattling the windows. I rushed to the door, yanking on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked from the inside. Panicked, I ran to the back door, but it was the same, locked. I tried every window, every possible escape route, but nothing would open. The house had trapped me inside. And then I heard the footsteps again, louder this time. They were coming down the stairs, slow and deliberate. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat as the sound grew closer and closer. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, and then there was silence. I didn't dare move. I waited, every muscle tense, listening for any sign of movement, but there was nothing, just the quiet. Heavy air pressing in around me. I couldn't explain it anymore. The house was alive. It wasn't just old creaks and groans. It was something more. Something that wanted me here. Wanted to keep me here. I stumbled backward, my mind racing, and that's when I saw it. A shadow in the corner of the room. Thin, stretched out against the wall, like someone had cast it from a light I couldn't see. The shadow didn't move. It just stood there, watching. I had to get out. I had to leave, but the house wouldn't let me. I couldn't breathe. The shadow in the corner of the room was no longer just a trick of the light. It had shape, form, and it was moving, slowly, inch by inch, its edges rippling like liquid, stretching toward me. I froze, my feet glued to the floor, my body stiff with fear. There was no sound, no footsteps, no whispers, only the oppressive silence of the house and the deep, choking sense that something was wrong. It wasn't just the house anymore. It was something in the house, something that was making its presence known, revealing itself in ways I couldn't explain. I turned my head slowly, searching for the source of the movement, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the shadow. It was alive in a way that I couldn't comprehend. I felt its weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The air itself felt heavier, colder. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candle I had left burning on the mantel. The darkness felt suffocating now, like the very walls were closing in on me. I tried to take a step back, but my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't break free of the grip the shadow had on me. And then, it was there, right in front of me, a cold breath brushing my cheek. Leave. The voice was unmistakable this time, deep and guttural, not from the shadow but from the walls themselves. The whispers seemed to come from every corner of the room, surrounding me, pulling at me, suffocating me with its urgency. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest as the shadow followed, sliding along the floor, rising up to meet me. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was something far worse. A presence. A being that had been waiting, watching, and now it wanted me. I turned and ran. My feet slipped on the old floorboards as I sprinted down the hall, frantic, desperate to escape. The footsteps, loud, heavy, pounding, followed me, closer now, right behind me. I could feel its cold breath on my neck, hear the dragging sound of whatever it was that followed. I reached the stairs, but the second I put my foot on the first step, the air grew cold again. Too cold. I felt the weight of something sitting on my chest, pressing down on me, pulling me into the dark. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. It was like I was trapped, my body unwilling to respond to my frantic thoughts. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but no sound came. The darkness seemed to swallow everything, leaving me alone with whatever was in the house, alone with the thing that had been waiting for me. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward me from the dark. It was almost as if the house was breathing, shifting around me, closing in. I fought, I struggled, but it was no use. I could feel the pressure building, suffocating me from all sides. The walls seemed to close in tighter with each passing second. "Get out," the voice whispered again. But this time, it wasn't just a whisper, it was a command, a demand. And I knew with every fiber of my being that it was too late. I broke free, scrambling up the stairs, my hands grasping for something, anything, to steady me. The house groaned beneath my feet, the walls cracking and creaking as I reached the top. I didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to think. I ran to the attic door, flinging it open, and slammed it shut behind me, locking it with shaking hands. But even as I stood there, panting, my chest heaving, I could hear the footsteps from below, still coming, still following, closer. It wasn't over. I didn't stay much longer. In a blur of panic and fear, I grabbed whatever I could carry and rushed out the back door. My feet hit the cold ground, and I didn't stop running until I was far away, far from the house, far from whatever it was that had been following me. But even now, as I sit here, far from the old Carver place, I can still hear it, the soft whisper of footsteps, the cold air that presses against my skin. The thing in the house, whatever it was, is still there, waiting, and it might be waiting for the next person to move in. It's been weeks since I left the house, weeks since I last felt the weight of its presence, the cold drafts that seeped into every corner of my mind, leaving me restless. I thought that leaving would end it. I thought that getting out of that cursed place would free me from whatever had been haunting me. But the nightmares, they never stopped. Every night, I find myself back in that house. The creaky floors, the heavy air, the whispering footsteps. I wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, as if the house had followed me into my dreams. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I wake up at night, I swear I can hear the faint sound of footsteps in the distance, like someone is walking just outside my door. It's been so hard to shake the feeling that I'm not alone, that the thing from that house is still watching me, even now. The air around me feels thick, as if the house's grip hasn't loosened, and I can't help but wonder, did I leave it behind, or did it follow me? I try to put it out of my mind, but then one day, something strange happens. I'm sitting at the kitchen table, trying to focus on something, anything, to distract myself from the gnawing fear. I glance at the clock on the wall, and then, in the corner of my eye, I see it. A shadow, a dark figure standing in the doorway. I freeze, my blood turning cold. It's not a person, not anyone I know. It's too dark, too wrong. I blink, and the shadow is gone, vanishing into the light of the hallway. My hands tremble as I grab my phone, ready to call anyone, but I can't bring myself to move. What if I'm just imagining it? What if it's my mind playing tricks? But then I hear it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward me from the hallway. The same footsteps I heard in the house. The same dragging sound. I want to scream, but no sound escapes me. My heart is hammering in my chest. I'm no longer sure if it's the house that's haunted, or if it's me. I get up, shaking, and move toward the door. My hand wraps around the handle, but it won't open. It's stuck, stubborn, like it's refusing to let me leave. The footsteps are closer now, so close I can feel them. I don't know if it's the house. I don't know if it's the thing from the attic or something else entirely, but it's here. It's in the room with me. I turn toward the sound, heart racing. There's nothing there, just the empty hallway. But I feel it, the coldness, the presence, the thing that's been waiting. Suddenly, the door flies open with a force that sends me stumbling backward. I crash into the wall, knocking a picture frame off the shelf. But before I can stand up, the cold air presses down on me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I don't know what I'm running from anymore. I don't know if I'm running from the house, from the thing in the house, or from something else entirely. But all I know is that I need to get away. I need to escape. I race out the door, down the street, until I can no longer hear the footsteps, no longer feel the presence. But when I finally stop, breathless, I turn around to look behind me, and there, just at the edge of my vision, I see the dark shape once again, waiting. I thought I was free. I really did. But now, as I stand here in the quiet of the night, I can't shake the feeling that I'm still not alone. It's been weeks since I left that house. Weeks since I ran from the darkness that I thought had been waiting for me. But the truth is, I've been running ever since. I've been running from the thing that followed me, from the feeling that no matter where I go, it's right behind me. It's in the air, thick and heavy, like a fog that settles into the corners of my mind. The footsteps, the whispers, they haven't stopped. I hear them when I close my eyes, when I turn a corner, when I think I'm safe. The shadow has found its way into my dreams and into my waking life, a constant reminder that I'm not alone. I need answers. I need to understand what happened in that house, what it is that's been haunting me. But I can't. I don't even know where to start. It was the neighbor, Mrs. Jennings, who first told me about the history of the house. She's lived in the area for years, long before I moved in, and I remember her mentioning something about the place being cursed. At the time, I thought it was just old gossip, a way to make the house seem more ominous than it was. But now, I wonder if there's truth in her words. I've gone back to the town records, to the old newspaper clippings, and what I found only deepens the dread in my chest. The house was built in the late 1800s by Alexander Carver, the same man whose journal I found. But Carver wasn't just some eccentric old man. He was obsessed with the occult, with rituals that supposedly bridged the gap between the living and the dead. He believed that through certain rites, he could open a doorway to another realm, a realm that was neither alive nor dead, but something else, something that existed in the dark spaces between worlds. The house, it seems, was built for that purpose. Every room, every wall, every door was carefully constructed to house his experiments. And it's said that something went terribly wrong. There are stories, whispers really, of the last family to live in the house before I moved in. The Smiths. They left in a hurry, running out of the house late one night. The father babbling about curses, about the things he had seen. It wasn't long after that the house sat empty for years, its history buried under layers of dust and time. But the thing I couldn't ignore, the thing that kept me up at night, is that some say the house was never truly empty. Some say it was waiting for the right person to come along, someone who would unknowingly open the door to the darkness that had been locked away for so long. And that person was me. I don't know how it works. I don't know if it was the rituals in the journal, or if it was simply my presence in the house that triggered something. But whatever it was, I opened the door, And now, whatever was trapped inside is free. I can feel it even now. It's watching me, waiting for the moment when I slip up, when I let my guard down. I can feel its presence, like a shadow that lingers just out of sight. I've tried everything. I've reached out to every so-called expert, every spiritualist, every paranormal investigator I could find. But no one can help me. No one has answers. They all say the same thing. It's a curse that can't be broken. And the worst part, the part that chills me to the bone, it's that the house wasn't just built to trap something. It was built to keep it there. And now, I'm part of it. I'm part of whatever Carver unleashed all those years ago. There's no running from it anymore. There's no escaping, because it's already inside me. It's been days since I uncovered the truth about the house. Days since I realized that I'm not just a victim of a curse, but an active participant in it. Every moment since has felt like a slow descent into madness, as if the walls themselves are closing in around me, suffocating me with their secrets. At night, the footsteps are louder. They echo in my mind even when I try to sleep, a constant reminder that whatever is in the house is still here with me, in my head, in my bones. I no longer hear them just in the dark corners of the rooms, but everywhere I go. Sometimes they're in the next room, just out of sight. Other times, they're right behind me, just beyond my reach. And every time I turn around, there's nothing. But it's not just the footsteps. I've started to notice other things, little things, that I can't explain. Things that make my skin crawl. The temperature fluctuates wildly. The air going from freezing cold to suffocatingly hot in an instant. I'll be sitting in the living room, trying to focus on something, and then suddenly the temperature will drop so fast that I can see my breath in front of me. But when I look at the thermostat, it's normal. Perfectly fine, no sign of any problem. And the smells, they come and go, like something rotting just beneath the surface. It's faint at first, like decaying wood or mildew, but then it becomes overwhelming, a stench so strong it makes my stomach churn. I'll rush to open the windows, but the smell lingers, hanging in the air like a sickly reminder of something that's not supposed to be there. I can't ignore it anymore. I have to face it. I have to confront whatever is in this house, whatever I've unknowingly unleashed. I start with the journal again. I pore over the pages, trying to make sense of what Carver was doing. He wrote about rituals, ceremonies designed to summon entities, beings from the shadows. They were supposed to be powerful, but also dangerous. Things that could take over, things that could feed on fear, on weakness. And according to Carver, the only way to close the door was to offer a sacrifice. That's what this is, a sacrifice. I'm the one who opened the door. I'm the one who let it out. And now, it's asking for payment. It's asking for me. The house groans at night, its old bones creaking and cracking like something is moving beneath it. Something huge, something alive. I hear whispers in the dark, but they aren't words. They're more like feelings, like the house is communicating with me on a level I can't comprehend. It's like it's trying to pull me back inside, pull me into its depths where I'll be lost forever, just like the others before me. I thought I could leave. I thought running away from the house would solve everything, but it didn't. I'm still here, trapped in this web of fear. The shadows are inside me now, inside my thoughts, lingering in every dark corner of my mind. Every time I close my eyes, I see them, darker than anything I've ever known, and I can feel it. I can feel it coming closer, always closer. I can't escape this. I can't escape the curse. And the worst part, I know that it's not just me. Whoever lives here next, whoever moves into this house after I'm gone, they'll experience the same thing. They'll hear the footsteps. They'll feel the cold, the whispers, the pressure. And the house will take them, just like it took me. Because the curse isn't just on me. It's on this house. And it will never let anyone leave. I've tried everything. I've reached out to those who claim to know, to those who say they can help. They told me things I already knew, things I hoped weren't true. They spoke in hushed voices about places like this, cursed homes, haunted by things that weren't always human. But nothing they said ever helped. Nothing worked. At first, I thought it was all just some trick, some elaborate ruse to scare me, to make me believe I was losing my mind. But now, after everything, after all that's happened, I'm not so sure. I know I can't keep living like this. The house, the curse, is pulling at me, drawing me back, as if it knows that I can't resist. I'm terrified to go back, but I know there's no other way. It's waiting for me, watching me, and no matter how far I run, it will never stop. It will never leave me alone until I face it, until I finish what I started. But what am I supposed to do? I have no answers. No one does. I've gone over it again and again in my head. The rituals, the curses, the sacrifices. What was Carver really trying to do? What was he trying to open? Was it really a door to another world, another realm, or something worse? Something beyond even his understanding? The truth is, I don't know. And I'm starting to think that maybe no one truly knows what's behind the door Carver opened. Maybe that's the curse. To never truly understand. To always be haunted by the unknown, by the things that creep in the dark corners of your mind. I made a choice that night. I ran. I thought that by leaving, by escaping, I could end it. But I didn't. And now I'm back at the house, standing at the front door, heart pounding, hands trembling. The air is thick, the smell of decay already starting to seep in as the shadows stretch across the lawn, like fingers reaching for me, pulling me in. I push the door open slowly and step inside. The house feels colder than before, emptier, like it's waiting for me to make a decision. I move through the rooms, each one more oppressive than the last. The creaking floorboards, the sudden gusts of wind, the cold spots. Everything is exactly as it was before. But this time it feels different. This time, I feel the presence more keenly, like it's watching me, waiting for me to make my move. The journal is still on the table, as if it had never been touched. I open it, flipping through the pages until I find the ritual that Carver believed would close the door. But as I read the words, the cold settles deeper in my bones. It's not just about a sacrifice. It's about choosing. A choice. The journal says that to close the door, the one who opened it must face the entity that crossed through. But it doesn't say how. It doesn't explain what happens once the choice is made. I can't tell if it's asking for a life, asterisk my asterisk life, or something else entirely. I don't know if it's even possible to close the door, but I can feel the presence of the thing pressing in from every direction, suffocating me. It's here, in the room with me, lurking in the shadows, whispering. And I know that I can't stay. I can't leave. There's only one way to end this. To stop the whispers, the footsteps, the terror. I have to make the choice. I have to decide what I'm willing to sacrifice to put an end to it all. But what if I'm already too far gone? What if the curse has already taken root in me, in my very soul? And what if, by choosing, I only make it worse? I hear the footsteps again, this time loud, heavy reel. They're coming closer, and I know the time is running out. I have to decide. I have to choose. But what if the house is already claiming me? What if, no matter what I do, I can never escape its grasp? I close my eyes, feeling the cold air wrap around me. And then, with a deep breath, I make my choice. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. The moment I made the choice, when I took that final breath, as if ready to face whatever I'd been avoiding all this time, the house shifted. It was as if the very walls had taken a deep, shuddering breath, exhaling all the tension that had built up over the months. The cold became unbearable, pressing into my skin, the temperature plummeting so fast that I could feel my limbs stiffening from the chill. And then the silence. It was the kind of silence you only get when everything is still, but something is waiting. It was as if the house itself had stopped breathing, holding its breath, waiting to see if I had made the right choice. I step forward almost hesitantly, and the floor creaks beneath my feet. A sound I've grown so used to, but now it feels different. Every creak is like an omen, a warning that I am not alone. I head toward the basement door. I don't know why. Maybe I think I'll find answers there, or maybe it's the only place left in this house I haven't dared to explore fully. But as I approach the door, a sense of dread washes over me, and I hesitate. The darkness beyond feels thick, suffocating, and I wonder if I'm already too deep in it to turn back. But before I can reach for the handle, the air shifts again. There's a sudden, bone-chilling gust of wind, and the door to the basement creaks open on its own. I freeze. My heart slams against my chest as if trying to escape, but my legs won't move. The house is pulling me in. The shadows from the stairs stretch into the hallway, deeper, darker, and I feel an unnatural pull toward them. Then I hear it, the footsteps again, but this time they're not my own. They're heavy, deliberate, and they come from below, from the basement. A voice, almost a whisper, slithers through the air. Asterisk, come down. Asterisk, I don't want to. Every part of me screams to turn around, to leave this house and never look back. But the whispers pull at my mind, and I take a step forward. Then another. My feet feel as though they're moving on their own, a force outside of me urging me on. I reach the top of the stairs, and I peer down into the abyss. The darkness below is absolute, no light, no warmth. Just cold. I can't see what's down there, but I feel it. The presence. It's waiting patient, as though it knows I will come. The footsteps grow louder. I swallow hard and begin my descent. Step by step, I move further into the basement, the air growing colder, the shadows seeming to twist and turn, whispering things I can't quite make out. The further I go, the more the cold becomes unbearable. I can feel it creeping into my bones, gnawing at my flesh. But I can't stop. I don't know why. Maybe I'm too scared to turn back now. Or maybe I already know that there's no turning back at all. And then, suddenly the stairs stop. There's no more solid ground beneath my feet. Only empty air. I'm floating. I gasp, my chest tightening, and the darkness closes in around me like a suffocating blanket. I'm falling into a bottomless pit. But before I can scream, before I can even process what's happening, a force grabs hold of me. Something cold, something alive. I struggle, but the grip tightens, pulling me deeper, deeper into the heart of the house, into the place I was never supposed to go. And then I see it, a figure, tall, shadowed, but not human. Its eyes, if you can call them eyes, are two black voids, absorbing the light around them, devouring everything in their path. And it's smiling, not with a mouth, but with the absence of one, a grin that stretches far too wide, filled with darkness, filled with nothing. Its hand reaches out, fingers long and thin, grasping for me. I try to pull away, but it's too strong. The air is thick with the scent of rot, of decay, and I can't breathe. It's choking me, tightening around my throat as the thing pulls me closer, its breath cold and wet against my skin. You've come to face me, it whispers, its voice low and guttural. Asterisk, but you cannot escape. Not anymore, asterisk. I want to scream, to run, to do anything, but there's nothing left. No escape, no choice. I am already trapped. In the silence that follows, in the pitch-black void of the basement, I realize something. I was never supposed to leave. This house, this curse, it doesn't just haunt you. It claims you. It waits for you to return. And when you do, it takes everything. It takes your fear, your soul, your very being. And it holds you forever. I don't know how much time has passed since I last felt the cold grip of that thing's fingers. It could have been moments, hours, or days. Time feels irrelevant now, as if it's no longer something I can grasp, no longer something I control. I'm no longer in the basement. I'm not sure where I am. The house is different now, though. It's quieter. Too quiet. The air is thick with a dense, suffocating stillness. I feel like I'm floating, disconnected from everything, like my body doesn't belong to me anymore. My mind is spinning in a haze, but somewhere, deep within that haze, I hear a voice, a whisper, asterisk, you were always going to be mine, asterisk, I want to scream, I want to fight back, but there's nothing left in me to fight with. The thing has taken me, taken my soul, my very essence, and I feel it within me, like a presence, a shadow that I can't escape. I blink, trying to focus, trying to understand what's happening. But the shadows are everywhere now. They've crept into the walls, into the floor, into the very air I breathe. I can feel them pressing against me, wrapping around me, pulling me into their depths. I can't move. I can't think. I can't even remember how I got here, or if I was ever truly alive to begin with. All I know is that I'm here now. I'm in the house. It's alive. The house, its walls, its floors, its very structure. It's a living, breathing thing, and it's consuming me piece by piece. There's no escape. There was never an escape. The whispers grow louder, closer, as if the house itself is speaking to me. Its voice the same as the thing that took me, the thing that waits in the darkness. I feel it moving through me, making its way into my soul, twisting my thoughts, corrupting my mind. I hear footsteps again, but this time they're not my own. They're someone else's, someone new. I can't see them, but I know they're here. I know they're standing in the doorway, just beyond the shadows, waiting for their turn. Welcome home. The voice whispers low and cold. Asterisk, you'll make a fine addition to my collection. Asterisk, and then I hear it. The sound I've been dreading. The sound I can never forget. The creaking of the front door. The sound of another person stepping inside. The house is alive, and it's always waiting. Always hungry. And now, it waits for the next one. Story 2. The sun had dipped below the horizon as I pulled up to the house. It wasn't what I had expected. The listing photos had been kind, smoothing over the imperfections in the walls and the yard. From the road, the house looked like a relic, an old structure struggling to hold on to whatever charm it had left. The windows were clouded with years of grime, the roof sagging in places, and the front door was a dull brown, peeling at the edges. But it was mine now. The price had been right, and after everything, I was in no position to be picky. I sat there in my car for a while, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I stared at the house, wondering what I was getting myself into. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the only sound being the distant hum of traffic and the occasional chirp of crickets. There was a sense of isolation here that I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't a bad thing, though. It was what I needed. Space to breathe, to think, to be alone with my thoughts without the constant reminders of what had happened. I exhaled and grabbed my bag, pushing the door open. The air outside was crisp, colder than I had expected for a late autumn evening. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and made my way up the creaky steps toward the front door. The porch was small, the wood beneath my boots groaning with each step, as if the house itself was waking up. I fumbled with the keys, then shoved the door open. The inside of the house smelled faintly of mildew and dust, the remnants of decades past. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet wash over me. The air in the house felt thick, as though it had been holding its breath. It was a strange sensation, one I couldn't quite place, but it was enough to make me pause. I shook it off, telling myself it was just the weight of the change, the unknown. A fresh start. That's what I needed. The entryway was dimly lit by the faint light from the street lamps outside. The floors were old hardwood, worn with age and footsteps long past. The walls, a faded yellow, were dotted with small cracks and chips. I could tell right away that the house had seen better days. But I wasn't here to judge it. I was here to make it mine. Slowly, I began unpacking, setting things down wherever there was space. I didn't have much, a few boxes, a couple of chairs, a mattress. It didn't take long to start feeling like home, even if it was only temporary. The living room had a large fireplace that stretched across one wall, the stone cold and jagged like the house itself. The furniture was sparse, but it didn't matter. The air felt stale, the kind of air that clung to everything and refused to move. I opened the windows, letting in the chilly night breeze, hoping it would bring some life to the place. As I moved deeper into the house, my feet echoed on the floors, the creaking and groaning making me feel strangely unsettled. It wasn't just the house settling either. There was something about it that made the silence feel unnatural, almost oppressive. I walked through the kitchen, taking in the old appliances, the chipped tiles on the floor. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, yet everything felt off, just enough to keep me on edge. Even the way the house seemed to breathe, its subtle shifts and sounds, wasn't quite right. It was as if the house were alive, aware of my presence, watching me as I moved through it. I went upstairs, the stairs squeaking under my weight as I climbed to the second floor. It felt colder up here, the air thick with dust and the smell of old wood. The hallway was narrow, and the floorboards creaked in protest with every step I took. The rooms were empty, except for a few pieces of old furniture that had been left behind, an antique dresser, a tarnished mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. I couldn't help but feel like the house was holding on to something that didn't belong to me. After setting down my bags in the master bedroom, I decided to take a walk around the yard. The grass was overgrown, and the fence in the back had clearly seen better days. I could barely make out the outline of a garden that had long since been abandoned, the flowers now little more than weeds. It seemed like no one had tended to this place in years. But again, that was why I was here, to get away, to find some peace, to start fresh. When I returned inside, the evening had deepened into night. I made a quick dinner, something simple, a can of soup, and sat down to eat by the window, gazing out into the dark. There were no street lights here, just the occasional flicker of a passing car in the distance. The quiet was almost suffocating, wrapping around me, making me feel small in a way I hadn't expected. But then it came, the sound, a slow creak, the unmistakable sound of wood bending under pressure, followed by a soft thud, like footsteps from above. I froze. My spoon hovered in midair, and I held my breath. It was so quiet in the house, so still. I strained to listen, but there was nothing, just a silence. I shook it off, telling myself it was the house settling, that old homes made noises. That's all it was. But then it came again. Thud, thud, the unmistakable sound of someone walking upstairs. My heart rate quickened, and I set my spoon down slowly, the clink of it against the bowl too loud in the quiet room. I got up and walked cautiously toward the stairs. The house was unnaturally quiet now, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. I glanced at the clock, 10:15 p.m. There shouldn't have been anyone up there. No one else was supposed to be here. I called out hello. My voice felt small, weak in the vast emptiness of the house. No answer. I turned back toward the stairs, but the sound came again, closer this time. Thud, thud. The heavy footfalls echoed through the house, vibrating in the floorboards beneath my feet. I knew there was no one else here. The landlord had made it clear when I signed the lease. The house had been empty for months, waiting for someone like me to move in. The footsteps weren't real. It was just the house, just the floorboard settling, just my mind playing tricks on me, right? I walked back into the living room, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest. It was just nerves. I had to stop overthinking it, but the sound, it wouldn't leave me. The first night in the house was uneventful, but unsettling. I woke up a few times, my eyes flicking open in the dark, and every time I did, I felt that same strange weight in the air. It wasn't the kind of weight that makes you feel safe, like the comfort of your blankets around you. No, it was a heavier kind, like something unseen was watching, lingering in the corners of my room. But I kept telling myself it was just the adjustment to the new place. New spaces often felt strange. The creaky floors, the whispers of old wood. The house was just getting used to me, I reasoned. And I was getting used to it. Or at least, I was trying to. The next day, I spent hours going through boxes and organizing my things. The house was cold, the chill never quite leaving, no matter how much I turned up the heater. I wasn't sure if it was just the season or if the house had some natural draft I hadn't found yet. There were some warm spots, though, especially by the windows, where the sunlight would peek through the blinds and fill the room with warmth. But as soon as the sun dropped, the house would return to its eerie chill. I was unpacking in the bedroom when I first heard it again, a faint sound, almost like whispers, coming from somewhere in the house. I froze, straining to listen. The sound wasn't quite like a voice, but more like a soft murmur. Something barely audible but unmistakably there. It was coming from the attic. I stood perfectly still, holding my breath, trying to discern what it was. The house was old, but it didn't seem the type to creak and groan like this on its own. Maybe it was the wind, maybe the pipes. There were 1,000 logical explanations, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the sound was wrong. I waited for a few minutes, listening for any more sounds, but everything grew still again. The air felt thick and oppressive, the silence heavy. I exhaled slowly and went back to what I was doing. I had to keep busy. If I didn't, I'd start dwelling on things, and I didn't want to do that. I was here to make a new life for myself. That evening, I met the neighbor, a woman in her late 60s named Margaret. She seemed kind enough, but there was an odd hesitation in her voice when she introduced herself. She mentioned that she'd been living next door for over 40 years, and we talked briefly about the neighborhood. As she spoke, her eyes kept flicking toward my house, as if she was watching it. No, not the house, but something about it. Eventually, she asked, "So, you're the new tenant in the old place, huh?" I nodded, unsure where she was going with this. "Yeah, I just moved in yesterday." She pursed her lips and gave a short, almost nervous laugh. "Well, it's a nice enough house, but, it's got its quirks." I raised an eyebrow. "Quirks?" She lowered her voice, leaning in a little closer. There's talk around town. The place has a history, you know." I frowned, not sure what she meant. "History?" Margaret nodded. "Yeah, the last people who lived there, they didn't last long. Just packed up one night and left without a word. Strange, isn't it? They weren't the first either. It's happened before." Her voice grew quieter, as if she didn't want anyone else to hear. "You'll hear things, too. You might hear footsteps upstairs or, things moving around. Happens at night mostly. Some folks say the place is cursed, but who knows? Just rumors, I suppose." I blinked, trying to process her words. "Curse?" I repeated, my voice unsure. "That sounds a little dramatic." Margaret smiled weakly, as if she didn't quite believe the words she was saying either. "I'm sure it's nothing. Just a house with a few creaks and groans. But you know how people get in a small town. Spooky stories, old rumors." She gave me a tight-lipped smile and quickly changed the subject, but I could tell something had shifted, something in her tone. The way her eyes darted to my house and back to me unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Later that evening, I stood in the kitchen, the low hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the silence. The night outside was cold, the sky heavy with clouds that blocked out the moon. I glanced up at the ceiling, wondering if I'd hear the strange sound from the attic again, but the house seemed quieter now. Still, as I cleaned the dishes, I kept feeling that strange pressure on my chest, like someone was watching me. I dismissed it. It was probably just nerves. I was alone in a new place, and things always felt off at first. But that night, as I tried to fall asleep, I heard the sound again. A thud, then another, and another, the heavy thumping of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor upstairs. I lay perfectly still in bed, my heart racing. I told myself it was just the house settling again. It had to be. Nothing else made sense. But then the footsteps stopped, and I heard something else. A soft, almost imperceptible scratching sound, like nails dragging across the wood. I held my breath, my fingers gripping the edge of the covers. The sound grew louder, closer. It was coming from the attic. I shot up from the bed, my mind racing. Was someone up there? The landlord had told me the attic was off limits, but I had no idea why. I grabbed my phone, quickly turning on the flashlight, and slowly made my way to the stairs, every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet making my heart pound harder. I reached the bottom of the stairs and stood there listening. The house seemed to hold its breath, the air too still, too thick. The scratching had stopped, but I could still feel something, a presence in the house, lurking just out of sight. I shook my head, telling myself to calm down. It was just my imagination. But even as I thought it, I knew I didn't believe it. The days after that night passed in a blur. I tried to keep busy, unpacking the last of the boxes, setting up the furniture, adjusting to the rhythm of my new life. But the house seemed to have a rhythm of its own, one that I couldn't shake. Every night, the footsteps returned, slow, deliberate, as though something or someone was moving through the upper floors, searching, waiting. It wasn't just the noise that unsettled me. It was the feeling that accompanied it. It wasn't the house settling. No, it was something else, something alive. One afternoon, as I wandered through town looking for a grocery store, I decided to stop by the small local library. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but something in the back of my mind kept nagging at me. I needed to know more about the house, the rumors, the history, what had really happened here. The library was quiet, dusty even, the shelves stacked high with old books. The woman at the counter gave me a curious look as I walked in, but didn't say anything. I headed straight for the local history section, my fingers brushing over the spines of the books. Finally, I found what I was looking for, an old leather-bound journal with the title * Town History, Unsolved Mysteries, *. I sat down at one of the tables, flipping through the pages until I came to a section about the house I was living in. My heart skipped a beat as I read the words. The house had been built in the early 1900s by a man named Victor Rilke. He was an eccentric figure, a wealthy recluse who had moved to the area under mysterious circumstances. It was said that he was obsessed with the occult, fascinated by ancient rituals and forbidden knowledge. He had built the house himself, carefully choosing each brick, each beam, as if he were constructing a shrine to something dark and ancient. As I read on, the story became even stranger. It turned out that Victor Rilke had not only been obsessed with the occult, but he had also been trying to open a door to another world, a place beyond our reality. He had performed rituals in the attic, according to the journal, using candles, symbols, and ancient texts to summon whatever was on the other side. The more I read, the more I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Rilke had never been seen again after that. The house had stood empty for years, and the rumors started. Strange noises at night, sightings of strange figures in the windows, people running out of the house in fear, babbling about curses. I skimmed through the rest of the journal, hoping for more answers, but there was only one final, chilling entry. It was a note written in a hurried, almost panicked hand. * The door is open. It's here. It has always been here. And it is waiting. * I slammed the journal shut, my hands trembling. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in way over my head. The house wasn't just old, it was haunted, cursed even. And whatever Rilke had tried to summon, whatever he had brought into this world, was still here waiting. I left the library in a daze, my mind racing. The more I thought about the footsteps, the strange noises, the odd sensation that someone or something was always just behind me. The more I realized that the house wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a prison for something far worse. That night, I sat in the living room, trying to shake the images of the journal from my mind. I'd made the mistake of looking up Victor Rilke's name online, and the search results only confirmed my fears. There were rumors of people who had lived in the house after him. People who had left in terror, their lives shattered by what they'd experienced. A few had been found babbling incoherently in the streets, their eyes wild, their bodies covered in strange symbols. Others had vanished completely, their names lost to time. And now, here I was, the latest tenant in a house that had become a prison for those who had dared to live in it. The sound of footsteps above me interrupted my thoughts. The slow, deliberate thud seemed closer this time, almost like someone was pacing. I had to do something. I had to see what was up there. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the stairs. The air was thick again, that same oppressive weight pressing down on me as I moved toward the attic door. I had never been up there, but something in my gut told me that tonight was the night. I couldn't keep ignoring it. I reached the top of the stairs, where the attic door stood ajar, as if waiting for me. The faintest light from the street lamps outside filtered in through the small window at the top of the stairs, casting long, eerie shadows across the wooden floor. My heart raced as I stepped closer, the floor creaking under my feet. The door swung open with a loud groan, revealing the dark space beyond. The attic was small, cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and forgotten memories. But what caught my attention was the center of the room. The floorboards in that spot were different, newer than the rest of the attic. They seemed to have been replaced recently. I took a deep breath and knelt down, shining the flashlight on the floor. There, in the center of the attic, was a large, circular symbol. It was etched into the wood, dark and worn, as though it had been there for decades. The symbols were unfamiliar to me, but they were unmistakably occult in nature. My breath caught in my throat as I stood up, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The air around me grew colder, the temperature dropping suddenly, and I could see my breath mist in front of me. The house creaked, the sound of wood shifting, but this time it wasn't the normal settling noises. It was something else. I turned toward the window, and for just a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the yard, staring up at me. But when I blinked, it was gone. I didn't waste any more time. I turned and ran out of the attic, slamming the door behind me. The footsteps were gone, but the chill remained, crawling under my skin, making me feel as though I was being watched from every corner. The following days blurred together in a haze of anxiety and dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was alive, aware of me, moving around me as if it were watching, waiting. The footsteps continued, always at night, always coming from the attic. They were no longer subtle. Each step seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, echoing down the hall, shaking the very foundation of the house. I stopped sleeping. The fear was too overwhelming, too consuming. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadows moving in the corners of the room, felt something cold pressing against my skin. The air was thick, the weight unbearable. I couldn't tell if I was going crazy or if something truly was lurking in the darkness, just out of reach. One night, after what felt like hours of restless pacing, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront whatever it was. I had to face the thing that haunted the attic, the thing that had been walking around above me every night, the thing that had been waiting for me to uncover its secrets. I had to know the truth. I grabbed the flashlight again, the same one I had used when I first ventured into the attic. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold on to it. The house seemed to hum with a low, unnatural energy, a steady vibration in the walls. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and began my journey up the stairs. The moment I stepped onto the landing, the temperature dropped. It wasn't just cold, it was freezing. My breath came out in visible puffs, swirling around me as I reached the attic door. The house groaned, the sound so deep it felt like it was coming from the earth itself. I could hear it, the footsteps, louder than before, as though whatever was up there knew I was coming, and it was preparing itself. I swung open the attic door, the hinges protesting with a loud squeal, and immediately, the air in the room hit me. It was thick, dense, like something was pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. The attic was darker than I remembered, the only light coming from the faint glow of my flashlight. Shadows danced across the walls, and I could feel the pulse of something just beyond my vision. The circular symbol in the center of the room was still there, but it seemed different now. It was as if it had grown, deepened into the floor, its edges jagged, its lines more pronounced. The faint scent of incense lingered in the air, clinging to the corners, and the wooden floor beneath my feet seemed to groan in protest, as though the house itself was alive. I swallowed hard, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps stopped. The air went completely still. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it all. Maybe this was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe this house wasn't haunted at all. But then I heard it, a whisper, a faint murmur, as soft as the rustling of leaves, but unmistakable. Asterisk leave. Asterisk. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The voice wasn't like any human voice. It was low, guttural, ancient. It seemed to echo in the room, vibrating through my bones. The hairs on my neck stood up as I turned slowly, my flashlight shaking, casting erratic beams across the attic. And that's when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, standing in the shadows, was a figure. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, the shadows playing tricks on me. But no, it was there, solid, unmistakable. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, draped in dark, tattered robes. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but its eyes, if you could even call them eyes, were two dark voids, empty and infinite, staring at me. I couldn't see a mouth, but I knew it was grinning. I could feel the malice radiating from it, the hunger, the need for something I couldn't even comprehend. I stepped back, my heart racing, my mouth dry. The whisper came again, this time clearer, more insistent. Asterisk, leave now. It's too late for you. Asterisk. I spun around, my legs nearly giving out beneath me as I bolted for the door. The footsteps followed me, louder now, thumping against the floor with every frantic step I took. The house seemed to close in on me, the walls bending, shifting. The air felt suffocating, thick with something dark. I reached for the door, my fingers fumbling with the knob, but it wouldn't budge. It was as though the house itself had locked me in. Asterisk, it's too late. Asterisk, the voice rasped, its tone low and mocking. Asterisk, you opened the door. Now you'll stay. Asterisk, I screamed, pulling desperately at the doorknob, but it refused to open. The footsteps grew louder, surrounding me now, echoing in every direction. The figure was closer, the black voids of its eyes growing larger, filling my vision. And then, suddenly, everything went silent. The footsteps stopped. The air became still. The weight, the pressure vanished. I stood there, gasping for breath, my body shaking uncontrollably. Slowly, I turned around, and the figure was gone. The attic was empty. The door swung open with ease, as if it had never been locked at all. I stumbled back down the stairs, my legs weak, my body trembling with a cold I couldn't shake. I ran out of the house, not caring about anything else, just needing to get away. I ran through the front door into the cold night air, gasping for breath as I looked up at the house one last time. It was quiet now. No footsteps, no whispers, but I could still feel it, the presence. Whatever was in that house was still there, watching me, waiting. I left the town the next morning, unable to stay another minute. But even as I drove away, I couldn't escape the feeling that it wasn't over, that whatever had been in that house, whatever I had unleashed, was still out there, and maybe, just maybe, It would be waiting for the next person to move in. I didn't stick around after that night. I couldn't. Every step I took away from that house felt like a step toward my sanity. But even as I drove miles between me and that cursed place, I couldn't escape the sensation that something was following me, just out of sight. The house, or whatever had been inside it, was still with me. The weight, the suffocating pressure, the cold, it lingered, clinging to my skin like a second layer of frost. I tried to push it all out of my mind. I tried to focus on the road, on the fact that I was finally leaving that town behind. But no matter how far I drove, the memories haunted me. The dark figure in the attic, the whispering voice, the feeling that I had opened something I couldn't close again. I found a small motel on the outskirts of the next town and checked in. It was one of those places that felt stuck in time. Dim lights, threadbare carpets, and a faded sign that flickered like it hadn't been updated in decades. It didn't matter. It was a safe haven, at least for the moment. I needed rest, but my body refused to settle. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the house, its broken windows, its dark corners, the twisted symbol in the attic. And every time I heard the footsteps, they were there, echoing in the back of my mind. I stayed in the motel for 2 days, trying to regain some semblance of normalcy. I couldn't keep running. I had to know what had happened to the house. What was it that I had uncovered? I could feel the questions growing in the pit of my stomach, gnawing at me, urging me to find answers. I had barely scraped the surface of what had happened there, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to know the full story. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about me. I had opened something that shouldn't have been opened, and now it was following me. I could feel it, pressing in on me from every direction. It was in the air, in the silence. The day after I left the motel, I called the library. I had to find out more. The local history journal had given me a glimpse of what had happened, but it wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed details. The librarian I spoke to was an older woman, her voice soft but firm. She told me she remembered Victor Rilke, though she was careful with her words. She said that not many people talked about him. People were too afraid, but she was willing to help. She mentioned a file in the back, something hidden away for years. She didn't say much, but I could tell it was something important. I drove back to the town, my hands gripping the steering wheel, the air heavy with the sense that I was walking into something I wasn't ready for. When I arrived at the library, the familiar smell of old paper and dust filled the air. The librarian led me to the back of the room, where a small wooden cabinet sat, its brass handles tarnished with age. She pulled out a thin, yellowing folder and handed it to me. Asterisk, this is all we have left. Asterisk. I opened the folder, my hands trembling. Inside were newspaper clippings, faded and torn, each one detailing a different event connected to the house. I read through them quickly, my pulse quickening with each line. One clipping detailed the disappearance of a family who had moved into the house after Victor Rilke's time. They had been in the house for less than a month before they vanished without a trace. The neighbors said they heard strange noises coming from the house at night. Heavy footsteps, whispering voices, and then, suddenly, nothing. The family was never found. Another article was about a man who had lived in the house for several years before finally running out in the middle of the night, screaming about the curse in the door. The same words I had seen in the journal. He was found days later, wandering the streets in a daze, his body covered in strange symbols and his eyes wide with terror. He died shortly after, unable to speak more than a few incoherent words. As I sifted through the clippings, my stomach churned. Each story felt like it was pushing me closer to something I wasn't prepared to face. And then, near the bottom of the folder, I found something else, something I hadn't expected. It was a photo of the house, taken in the early 1900s. In the foreground stood Victor Rilke, his face pale, his eyes dark and hollow. But what struck me wasn't just his appearance. It was the shadow behind him, It was unmistakable. A figure, tall and thin, standing just out of focus, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. My heart skipped a beat. The figure looked like the one I had seen in the attic, the one that had whispered for me to leave. I quickly scanned the rest of the file, but it was clear there were no more answers to be found. No one knew exactly what had happened to Rilke or what had become of him, but there was one line that caught my eye, one that seemed to sum up everything I had learned. Asterisk, the door remains open, and it always will. Asterisk, I felt a chill run through me. The door, the same door Rilke had tried to open, the one he had used to summon whatever it was that haunted the house. The door had never truly closed. And now, whatever had been unleashed was free to roam, to follow, to haunt anyone who dared to come too close. I left the library, my mind spinning with the weight of what I had uncovered. I had learned the truth, but it was a truth that left me with more questions than answers. What had Rilke opened? What had he brought into this world? And why had it chosen me? The further I got from the library, the more the weight of my discoveries settled in. The footsteps were louder now, always just behind me, always echoing in the corners of my mind. I couldn't escape it. No matter how far I ran, no matter how much I tried to bury it, I was marked. I was connected to that house, to whatever had been set free, and I had no idea how to stop it. I kept hearing the whispers, low and haunting, always in the distance, always calling my name. Asterisk, it's too late. You can't leave now. Asterisk. And as the days passed, I realized the truth. It was never just about the house. It was about me. And no matter where I went, whatever I did, I would never be free. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The whispers, the footsteps, the figure in the attic. No matter how many times I tried to push it from my mind, it always came back, lurking in the corners of my thoughts. I tried to bury the truth, to pretend like I had escaped whatever curse haunted that house, but I couldn't. It was inside me now, in my blood, in my bones. The more I tried to run from it, the more it clung to me, pulling me back toward the place I swore I'd left behind. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore, the feeling that I had unfinished business. I had to go back. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not anyone. I couldn't risk them seeing the madness that had taken hold of me. But deep down, I knew the truth. I couldn't rest until I had confronted whatever had been left behind, whatever was still waiting for me in that house. So I made the decision. I packed my things, put my fears aside, and drove back to the town. The air was thick with tension as I crossed into familiar territory, and my hands trembled on the steering wheel. Every mile felt heavier than the last. It was like the earth itself was pulling me back toward that cursed house, drawing me in with invisible strings. As I turned onto the familiar road, I saw it, the house. It was still standing, dark and silent, just as I remembered it. The windows were covered with thick, black curtains, and the lawn was overgrown, as if no one had stepped foot on it in years. The place looked abandoned, but I knew better. I knew it was waiting for me. I parked my car down the street, far enough so that no one would see me, and stood there for a moment, staring at the house. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. I was terrified, but there was also a strange sense of inevitability, like this was the only thing left for me to do. I could feel it, though. Something was different. The air was heavier, more oppressive than before, as if the house itself had been lying in wait, its hunger growing stronger with each passing day. I walked up the front steps slowly, my feet dragging, as though I were wading through thick mud. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the familiar smell of old wood and mildew greeting me. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. It felt just as it had before, creepy, unsettling, full of secrets. The house didn't feel abandoned. It felt alive, as if something was watching me, waiting for me to make my move. I didn't hesitate. I knew where I needed to go. I headed straight for the attic, climbing the stairs one step at a time, each creak of it sending chills down my spine. The closer I got to the attic, the colder it became. It felt like I was walking into a freezer. My breath turned to mist in the air, and I could feel the walls closing in on me. When I reached the door, I paused, hand on the knob. I didn't know what I was expecting. The figure in the corner, the footsteps, the whispers. But nothing prepared me for what I saw when I stepped inside. The attic was empty. No figure, no shadows, no footsteps, no whispering. It was silent, too silent. I scanned the room, my eyes darting across the space, looking for any sign that I hadn't been alone. The symbol was still there in the center of the floor, but it looked different. It was more pronounced, deeper, like it had been carved into the wood itself. And then I saw it, a book. It was lying in the center of the room, just beside the symbol, a thick, leather-bound book with no title. It looked ancient, its pages yellowed with age. There was something about it that called to me, something in the way it lay there as if it had been waiting for me. I picked it up, my fingers trembling. As soon as I opened the first page, a cold wind swept through the attic, swirling around me. The pages were filled with strange symbols, ancient text written in a language I couldn't understand. But there in the margin of the first page were words that I could read. Asterisk, you've returned, and now you belong. Asterisk, a chill ran down my spine. It was a warning, but it was too late. I had already opened the book. I had already crossed the threshold. The air grew colder. The floorboards creaked, and I could hear footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps. They were coming from behind me, from the dark corner of the room. I spun around, my flashlight shaking in my hands, but the corner was empty. There was nothing there, except the air. It was thick now, pressing in on me. The walls seemed to warp, bending inward. My heart raced. The house was alive again, and I had just made it worse. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I backed away, my mind screaming to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My body was frozen, my breath shallow. The footsteps were right behind me now, so close I could feel the floor vibrate underfoot. I turned around, ready to face whatever was coming, and then I saw it, the figure from before. It was standing in the corner, its eyes glowing, bright, burning like twin flames. Its mouth opened, but no sound came out, only a rush of cold air, so intense I could feel it biting into my skin. I dropped the book, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The footsteps stopped. The figure was moving toward me, its shape growing larger, its form more defined. It reached out, and I could feel the pressure, the cold, the dark energy that surrounded it. I tried to move, to run, but my body was paralyzed. I could only watch as it stepped closer, its eyes never leaving mine. Then it spoke. Asterisk, you shouldn't have come back. Asterisk, I could feel its presence in my chest, suffocating me, filling my lungs with ice. The words echoed in my mind, and I knew then that there was no escape. I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't escape the thing that haunted it. The door slammed shut, and I was trapped. The figure stepped closer, its touch freezing, and I screamed. But no one would hear. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, my eyes locked on the figure that had materialized in front of me. My heart hammered in my chest, my breath shallow and frantic. I could feel the cold pressing in from all sides, numbing my skin, tightening around my chest. The darkness in the room seemed to swirl, pulsing with an energy I couldn't comprehend, like something ancient and malevolent was trying to swallow me whole. I should have run, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. The cold had seeped deep into my bones, paralyzing me, turning my body into stone. My mind screamed for escape, but the words didn't reach my mouth. The figure took another step toward me, and that's when I saw it, the door. At first, I thought it was just another part of the room, another shadow lurking in the corner. But when I looked again, I realized what it was. A door, a wooden door with carvings so intricate They seemed to pulse with life. I hadn't noticed it before. It wasn't there when I entered the room. It hadn't been there until now. The figure's eyes glowed brighter, the intensity of its stare searing into my soul. I felt its cold gaze wrap around me, holding me in place. And then it spoke again. Asterisk, you're too late. Asterisk, I tried to move, to scream, to do anything, but I was paralyzed. The figure didn't need to touch me to hurt me. It was in my mind, in my body, pulling at my thoughts, twisting my fears. I could feel it, its presence seeping into me, into my very soul. The door behind the figure seemed to hum, vibrating in the stillness of the attic. It felt as though it was alive, as though it had been waiting for something, waiting for me. The figure turned its head slowly toward the door, as if beckoning me to follow its gaze. And I did. My eyes locked onto the door. Something inside me knew deep down that it was the source of all of this. The house, the curse, the entity that stood before me. It was all connected to that door. It was like the door was calling me, whispering my name in a voice I couldn't hear, but could feel deep within my bones. Open it, the figure whispered, its voice like ice scraping against metal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But the door, it was the only thing that made sense. The only thing that could explain why all of this was happening. I knew I couldn't leave without understanding. I knew I couldn't escape this house until I opened that door. I took a step forward, my legs shaking, my mind screaming at me to stop. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. My hand reached out toward the door, and the cold seemed to thicken in the air, pressing against me, trying to keep me away. But I pushed through it. My fingers brushed against the handle, and I felt a jolt of electricity shoot up my arm, like the door itself had recognized me. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was silent. The figure was gone. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, but I couldn't stop now. I had to know. I twisted the handle. The door creaked, a sound like nails on a chalkboard, and it opened. The world shifted. The room spun, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. A pressure unlike anything I had ever felt pushed against me. It felt like a weight, 1,000 hands pressing down on my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. The darkness in the room swirled, bending and shifting, forming shapes that didn't belong. And then I saw it. The other side of the door wasn't what I expected. It wasn't another room. It wasn't a hallway. It was a void, a black, empty space that seemed to stretch on forever. There was no light, no sound, just an endless abyss that seemed to reach out, beckoning me to step inside. I couldn't look away. The pull was undeniable, like something was reaching for me from the other side, tugging at my soul. "Don't go," a voice whispered, but it wasn't my voice. It wasn't the figure's voice either. It was something deeper, something ancient, but it didn't matter. The door had opened, and the abyss was waiting. I stepped forward, my body moving on its own, my feet carrying me toward the darkness. I couldn't stop it. I crossed the threshold, and suddenly, the world exploded. The force hit me like a shock wave, sending me crashing to the floor. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the very atmosphere had changed. I couldn't see, couldn't think. My mind was drowning in darkness. Then a sound, a faint whisper, a voice I recognized but I couldn't place. Asterisk, it's not over. Asterisk. And in that instant I knew. I wasn't alone. Whatever had been waiting for me on the other side was still there, still watching, still waiting. It was as if I had crossed into another world, another plane, where the rules of reality didn't apply. I tried to move, to stand, but the pressure was too much. The cold returned, wrapping around me, suffocating me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The darkness pressed in, and the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the void. Asterisk, you should never have opened it. Asterisk, the voice echoed around me, louder now, coming from every direction. I was trapped, and I couldn't escape. I don't know how long I lay there, suspended in the oppressive blackness. Time didn't seem to exist in that place. Seconds, minutes, hours, it was all meaningless. The void pressed against my skin, an icy, suffocating presence that felt as if it were seeping into my soul. I couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't feel anything but the cold. It was as if I had become part of the emptiness itself. And then, slowly, I began to hear something. It started as a faint hum, low and distant, vibrating in my chest like the remnants of a sound too ancient to comprehend. It grew louder, a rhythmic pulse, like the beating of a heart buried deep beneath the surface. My own heartbeat quickened in response, syncing with the unnatural rhythm. I wanted to move, to pull myself away from the sound, but my body remained frozen. My limbs were numb, unresponsive, as if the void had taken control of me. The hum turned into whispers. At first, I couldn't make out the words. They were soft, barely audible, slipping through the darkness like smoke. But as they grew louder, I began to understand. It wasn't one voice, but many, hundreds, maybe thousands, all speaking in unison. Their words layered over each other like a haunting chorus. Asterisk, it sees you. It knows you. You are one of us now. Asterisk, the whispers crawled under my skin, burrowing into my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block them out, but it didn't matter. The voices weren't coming from outside. They were inside me. They were everywhere. And then the ground beneath me shifted. It was subtle at first, a gentle tremor, like the world was breathing. But it grew stronger, more violent, until I could feel myself being pulled downward. The floor, or whatever surface I was lying on, seemed to dissolve, turning into a thick, viscous substance that clung to my body. I tried to resist, to fight against the pull, but it was useless. The darkness was dragging me deeper, swallowing me whole. I fell. The descent felt endless, like I was plunging into the depths of an ocean with no bottom. The cold grew sharper, biting into my skin like shards of ice. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, their voices overlapping in a chaotic cacophony that threatened to tear my mind apart. And then, suddenly I stopped. I landed hard on a solid surface. The impact jarred me back into awareness. My eyes snapped open, and for the first time, I could see. I was no longer in the attic. I was standing in a cavernous space, vast and hollow, with walls that seemed to stretch endlessly upward. The air was thick with mist, swirling in patterns that made it hard to tell where the ground ended and the sky began. The walls were slick with a strange, black substance that pulsed faintly, like it was alive. In the distance, I could see shapes, tall, shadowy figures that moved in and out of view, their forms dissolving into the mist like phantoms. I wasn't alone. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. The figures in the distance weren't just wandering aimlessly. They were watching me. I could feel their eyes, their gazes piercing through the fog, locking onto me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I took a step back, my foot slipping on the wet, uneven ground. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing through the cavern with a sense of urgency. Asterisk, you shouldn't be here. Asterisk. My heart raced as I turned in circles, trying to find an escape. But there was no door, no path, no way out. The cavern was a labyrinth of shadows and mist, and every step I took seemed to lead me further into the darkness. And then I saw it. In the center of the cavern stood a massive structure, a stone altar, ancient and weathered, covered in the same black substance that coated the walls. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, glowing faintly with a sickly green light. The air around it crackled with energy, and I could feel the pull, the same magnetic force that had drawn me to the door in the attic. I didn't want to go near it, but my body moved on its own, as if the altar had taken control of me. With each step I took, the whispers grew louder, more desperate, their voices blending into a deafening roar. Asterisk, stop. Don't go closer. It's awake. It's watching. Asterisk. But I couldn't stop. I was being pulled toward the altar, my feet dragging against the ground as I tried in vain to resist. The air grew colder with each step, the mist thickening until I could barely see. The whispers became screams, echoing in my mind with a force that threatened to shatter my sanity. When I reached the altar, I saw it. A book. The same book I had found in the attic. It was lying on the altar, its leather cover glistening with the black substance that dripped from its pages. The symbols on the altar glowed brighter as I reached out to touch it, my hand trembling. I didn't want to open it. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn back, to run. But the pull was too strong. I couldn't resist. My fingers brushed against the cover, and the world erupted. The cavern shook violently, the ground splitting open beneath me. A deafening roar filled the air, a sound so loud it felt like the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. The mist turned black, swirling around me like a storm, and I could see the figures in the distance moving closer, their forms growing more defined. They weren't human. They were tall, gaunt creatures with hollow eyes and elongated limbs, their movements jerky and unnatural. They surrounded the altar, their mouths opening in silent screams as they reached out toward me. I stumbled back, clutching the book to my chest, but there was nowhere to go. The altar began to sink, dragging me down with it. The black substance rose around me, engulfing my legs, my torso, my arms. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. The last thing I saw before the void consumed me was the glowing eyes of the figures, their gazes burning into my soul. And then everything went silent. When I woke up, I was lying on the cold wooden floor of the attic. My chest heaved as I gasped for air, the damp, stale smell of the room filling my lungs. My hands were trembling, clutching something tightly. I looked down and saw it, the book. Its leather cover was damp, the black substance that had dripped from it in the cavern now dry and flaking away like ash. I scrambled to my feet, my legs weak and unsteady, and stumbled toward the attic window. The pale light of dawn was breaking through the cracks in the wood, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. For a moment, I felt a flicker of relief. I was back in the house. The cavern, the figures, the void, it had all been a nightmare. Or so I thought. As I turned to leave the attic, I froze. The air in the room was wrong, thicker, heavier, as if the walls were closing in around me. And then I noticed it, the door. It was still there. The same door I had opened to enter the void now stood in the corner of the attic, its carved surface pulsing faintly with an unnatural light. My stomach dropped. It wasn't a dream. I had opened something that wasn't meant to be opened, and now it was here in my world. The whispers started again, faint but insistent, slithering through the air like a cold wind. Asterisk, you brought it back. Asterisk. I clutched the book tighter, my mind racing. I had to get out of the house. I had to leave before whatever I had unleashed consumed me. But as I turned to flee, the floor beneath me groaned and I felt a sharp, icy breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just the empty attic, the shadows dancing across the walls. But I could feel it, the presence. It was here, watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I bolted for the stairs, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. The house seemed different now, darker, as if the shadows had grown longer and more menacing. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and I could hear faint whispers coming from every direction, their words indistinct but filled with malice. When I reached the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks. The walls were covered in symbols, intricate, spiraling patterns that glowed faintly with the same sickly green light as the door. They hadn't been there before. They were spreading, crawling across the surface like a living thing. I turned toward the front door, but it was gone. The space where it had been was now just a blank wall, the symbols spreading across it like veins. Panic set in. I was trapped, I ran to the kitchen, hoping to find another way out, but the windows were gone too, replaced by the same blank, pulsating walls. The house was transforming, shifting into something unrecognizable. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were all I could hear. They were inside my head now, clawing at my thoughts, filling my mind with images of the cavern, the figures, the altar. I clutched my head, sinking to my knees, trying to block them out. And then, through the chaos, I heard a voice, a single voice, clear and calm, cutting through the noise. Asterisk, read the book. Asterisk, I looked down at the book in my hands. Its cover now warm to the touch. The black substance was gone, replaced by a faint, golden glow that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. I didn't want to open it. I was terrified of what I might find, but the voice was insistent. Asterisk, read it. It's the only way. Asterisk. With shaking hands, I opened the book. The pages were filled with symbols and strange, flowing script that I couldn't read. But as I stared at them, the words seemed to shift and rearrange themselves, forming sentences in a language I could understand. The text told the story of the house's original owner, a man named Elias Grayson. He had been a scholar, obsessed with the occult and the mysteries of the universe. According to the book, Elias had discovered a way to open a door to another plane of existence, a place where time and space didn't exist, where ancient, unknowable beings dwelled. He believed these beings held the secrets to ultimate power, and he had spent years performing rituals to contact them. But something had gone wrong. The book described how Elias had opened the door, just as I had, and unleashed something into the world, something that couldn't be contained. The house had become a conduit, a bridge between their world and ours. And now, it was happening again. The final pages of the book were filled with warnings, scrawled hastily in a shaky hand. Asterisk, the door cannot be closed. The bridge cannot be destroyed. It will spread. It will consume everything. There is no escape. Asterisk, the last sentence sent a chill down my spine. Asterisk, it needs a host. Asterisk, the whispers grew louder, more frenzied, as if they were responding to the words in the book. I slammed it shut, my hands trembling. The air in the room grew colder, the shadows darker, as if the house itself was reacting to my discovery. And then I felt it, a presence, stronger than before, pressing down on me, suffocating me. The shadows in the room began to shift, converging into a single, towering form. It was a figure from the attic, but it was different now. Larger, more defined, its glowing eyes burning with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You've read it," it said, its voice echoing in my mind. Asterisk, now. You are mine. Asterisk, shall I continue with chapter 10? The figure loomed over me, its shadow stretching across the room, swallowing the dim light. Its eyes burned into mine, twin orbs of molten gold that flickered like flames, pulsing in sync with the frantic pounding of my heart. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was as though the air had been sucked from the room, replaced by a suffocating, unholy presence. "You've read it," the voice repeated, a low, guttural growl that reverberated deep in my chest. Asterisk, now. You are mine. Asterisk. I tried to speak, to scream, but no sound came out. My throat felt like it was closing. My body frozen in place as the figure began to move closer. It didn't walk. It glided, its form shifting and flickering like a flame caught in the wind. Its outline was hazy, undefined, as if it were made of smoke and shadows. But its eyes were all too real. As it moved closer, I felt an overwhelming pressure in my head, a searing pain that made my vision blur. Images flashed before my eyes, scenes of violence, chaos, and destruction. People screaming, running, their faces twisted in terror. I saw the house, but it was different, older, its walls blackened and crumbling, flames licking at its edges. And in the center of it all was a figure, its eyes glowing with a terrible hunger. You opened the door, it hissed, its voice sharp and cutting, like shards of glass. Asterisk, you invited me in. And now, we are bound. Asterisk, I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. The shadows around me seemed to come alive, curling around my ankles like tendrils, holding me in place. The book in my hands grew hotter, the glow from its cover intensifying until it was almost blinding. I wanted to drop it, to throw it away, but my hands wouldn't let go. It was as if the book had fused to my skin, its power coursing through me like fire. Asterisk, do you feel it? Asterisk, the figure whispered, its voice softening, almost tender. Asterisk, the connection, the power. It's already inside you. Asterisk, my head throbbed, the pressure building until it felt like my skull was going to split open. I could feel something foreign, moving inside me, creeping through my veins like poison. It was cold and sharp, and it carried with it a sense of dread, so profound it made my stomach turn. Stop. I managed to choke out, my voice barely more than a whisper. Asterisk, please stop. Asterisk. The figure chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. Asterisk, stop. Asterisk, it said, tilting its head as if amused. Asterisk, there is no stopping. You're already mine. Your body, your mind, your soul. They belong to me now. Asterisk. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. No, I whispered, my voice trembling. Asterisk, I didn't mean to. I didn't know. Asterisk, ignorance does not absolve you, the figure replied, its voice growing colder. Asterisk, the door has been opened. The bond has been forged. And now, you will serve me. Asterisk, the shadows around me tightened, pulling me to my knees. I could feel the cold seeping into my skin, spreading through my body like a virus. My vision blurred, the room spinning around me as the pressure in my head reached its peak. I wanted to fight, to resist, but I was too weak. The figure's presence was overwhelming, its power suffocating. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take any more, the figure reached out and touched me. Its hand, or what passed for a hand, was cold and weightless, like the touch of a ghost. But the moment it made contact with my skin, I felt a jolt of energy surge through me, sharp and electric. My body convulsed, my muscles locking up as the figure's presence flooded my mind. I saw flashes of its memories, visions of ancient rituals, dark and twisted, performed in the dead of night under a blood-red moon. I saw Elias Grayson, standing in the very room I was in, his face gaunt and hollow, his eyes filled with a desperate hunger. I saw the door being opened, the same door I had found in the attic, and the shadows pouring out, consuming everything in their path. And then I saw myself. I was standing in front of the altar, the book in my hands, my face pale and tear-streaked. The figure was behind me, its shadow stretching out like a dark tide, engulfing me. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't just possessing me. It was becoming me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I screamed, a raw, guttural sound that tore through the silence. The shadows recoiled slightly, their grip on me loosening, and I used the moment to fight back. I focused all my energy, all my willpower, on breaking free, on pushing the figure out of my mind. You cannot resist, it snarled, its voice echoing in my head. Asterisk, you are mine. Asterisk, asterisk, no. Asterisk, I screamed, my voice rising above the chaos. Asterisk, you can't have me. Asterisk, the figure hissed, its eyes blazing with fury, and the shadows around me surged forward, wrapping around my throat. I clawed at them, gasping for air, but they were like smoke slipping through my fingers. My vision dimmed, the room fading into darkness, and I felt myself slipping away. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The book. It was still glowing, its cover pulsing with a faint, golden light. I reached out, my hand trembling, and placed it on the book's surface. The moment I made contact, a surge of energy shot through me, and the shadows recoiled, hissing and writhing as if burned. Asterisk, what are you doing? Asterisk, the figure roared, its voice filled with panic. I didn't know what I was doing, but I didn't stop. I opened the book, the pages glowing brighter with each turn, and began to read. The words poured out of me, their meaning unclear, but their power undeniable. The shadows screamed, their forms dissolving into wisps of smoke, and the figure staggered back, its eyes wide with fear. Asterisk, stop. Asterisk, it screamed. Asterisk, you don't know what you're doing. Asterisk, but I didn't stop. I kept reading, the words flowing from my lips like a river, their power building with each syllable. The room shook, the walls cracking and splintering, and the figure let out one final, ear-splitting scream before it vanished, consumed by the light. And then everything went still. I collapsed to the floor, the book slipping from my hands. The air was heavy with silence, the oppressive presence gone. But as I lay there, gasping for breath, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that the figure wasn't truly gone. I wasn't free. Not yet. I don't remember how long I lay there on the floor of the living room, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. The house was deathly silent now. No creaks, no whispers, not even the faint groan of the wind outside. My body felt heavy, like every ounce of strength had been drained from me. My hands were raw, trembling, the memory of the glowing book still imprinted on my palms. For a moment, I thought it was over. I thought I had won, but deep down I knew better. The book was still lying on the floor a few feet away, its cover dark and lifeless, as if all the energy had been sucked out of it. I wanted to leave it there, to walk out of the house and never look back, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The memory of the figure's voice echoed in my mind, taunting me, reminding me that the battle wasn't over. Asterisk, you are mine. Asterisk. I forced myself to sit up, every muscle in my body protesting. The room felt colder now, the air thick with an invisible weight that pressed down on my chest. The symbols on the walls had faded, their faint glow reduced to dull smudges, but I could still feel their presence, like scars burned into the fabric of the house. I picked up the book, cradling it in my hands like a fragile, dangerous thing. The leather was cool to the touch, its once pulsing glow now replaced by a faint, eerie warmth. I wanted to destroy it, to tear it apart and burn it to ashes, but I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The book was a part of the house now, a part of me. As I stood, a faint sound broke the silence, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from upstairs. My stomach dropped. I turned toward the staircase, my heart pounding, the blood rushing in my ears. The sound grew louder, more insistent, like fingers drumming against wood. I didn't want to go. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from the house as possible. But something compelled me forward, pulling me toward the stairs like a moth to a flame. The steps groaned under my weight as I climbed, the sound echoing through the empty house. The tapping grew louder with each step, its rhythm steady and deliberate, like the ticking of a clock. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, my hands were shaking, the book clutched tightly to my chest. The sound was coming from the attic. I stood frozen at the base of the attic ladder, staring up at the hatch. It was slightly ajar, a faint sliver of light spilling out into the hallway. The tapping had stopped now, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. I reached for the ladder, my fingers brushing against the cold metal rungs. The air grew colder as I climbed, each step feeling heavier than the last. By the time I reached the top, my breath was visible, small puffs of fog that hung in the air like ghostly apparitions. The attic was exactly as I had left it. The same dusty floorboards, the same cobweb-covered rafters. But the door was gone. In its place was a faint outline, a shimmering trace of where it had been, like a scar etched into the fabric of reality. I stepped closer, my heart racing, the book still clutched tightly in my hands. The air around the outline shimmered, distorting like heat waves rising off asphalt. And then I saw it, a handprint. It was faint, barely visible, but it was there, pressed into the surface of the wall, as if someone had tried to claw their way through. My stomach turned as I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold, rough surface. The moment I touched it, a voice whispered in my ear, soft and chilling, "Asterisk, you can't leave." Asterisk. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. The air in the attic grew heavier, the light dimming until the room was bathed in shadows. I could feel it again, the presence. It wasn't gone. It had never left. Asterisk, you think you can escape me. Asterisk, the voice hissed, echoing around the room. Asterisk, you think you can undo what you've done. Asterisk. I spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but the attic was empty. The shadows on the walls seemed to shift and writhe, forming shapes that dissolved as quickly as they appeared. You opened the door. The voice continued, colder now, more menacing. Asterisk, and now you must pay the price. Asterisk. The book in my hands grew warm, its cover pulsing faintly with light. I opened it. The pages flipping on their own, the text glowing with an otherworldly energy. The symbols danced across the paper, rearranging themselves into words I could understand. The bond cannot be broken, the text read. Asterisk, the host cannot be freed, but the bridge can be severed. Asterisk, my breath caught in my throat. Was it possible? Could I sever the connection between the house and the entity? The attic shook, the walls groaning as if the house itself was reacting to the words. The light from the book grew brighter, illuminating the room, and I saw them. Figures, shadows writhing and twisting in the corners, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Asterisk, you cannot sever the bridge. Asterisk, the voice roared, its fury shaking the walls. Asterisk, the bridge is eternal. You are eternal. Asterisk. I ignored the voice, focusing on the book, the words burning into my mind. The ritual was complicated, requiring precise steps and unwavering focus. I didn't understand half of it, but I didn't care. I had to try. As I began to recite the incantation, the figures in the shadows surged forward, their forms twisting and writhing as they clawed at the edges of the light. The room grew colder, the air thick with a suffocating pressure, but I kept going, my voice steady and firm. The symbols on the walls began to glow, their faint light intensifying until the entire attic was bathed in an eerie, golden glow. The figures screamed, their voices a cacophony of rage and despair, but they couldn't penetrate the light. And then with a final, deafening roar, the room fell silent. The figures were gone, the shadows retreating into the corners. The light from the book faded, its warmth replaced by a cold, lifeless stillness. I sank to my knees, the book slipping from my hands, my body trembling with exhaustion. It was over, or so I thought. I stumbled out of the attic, my legs weak and my breath shallow. The house was eerily quiet, the oppressive weight I had felt since moving and lifted, at least for the moment. Every step down the stairs felt surreal, like I was walking through a dream. The book hung limply in my hand, its pages dark and cold. The living room looked the same as it always had, but something was different. The air was no longer suffocating. The shadows no longer writhed along the walls. It felt normal. I collapsed onto the couch, my head in my hands. It was finally over. I had severed the connection, banished whatever had taken root in the house. And yet, the silence was unnerving. The words from the attic echoed in my mind. Asterisk, the host cannot be freed, but the bridge can be severed. Asterisk, what did that mean for me? I sat there for hours, watching as the sunlight filtered through the curtains, the faint chirping of birds outside grounding me in reality. For the first time in days, I felt safe, but the peace didn't last. It started with a faint sound, just a creak, like the house settling. I ignored it at first, brushing it off as nothing. But then came another and another until the sound grew into a pattern. Footsteps. My chest tightened as I listened. The familiar rhythm of heavy, deliberate steps echoing through the house. They weren't coming from upstairs this time. They were coming from the basement. I stood, my body tense, my eyes fixed on the basement door. It was closed, just as I had left it, but the footsteps were unmistakable. "It's not possible," I whispered to myself, clutching the book tightly. The steps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just behind the door. I stared at it, my heart pounding, waiting for something, anything to happen, but the door didn't move. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I approached the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. I hesitated, my breath shallow, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. Finally, I turned the knob and flung the door open. The basement was dark, the faint light from the living room barely illuminating the top of the stairs. The air was cold, carrying a faint, metallic tang that made my stomach churn. I stared into the darkness, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. No movement, no sound. Just an empty staircase leading into the void. And then I saw it, a single handprint on the wall, smeared in what looked like ash. I slammed the door shut, backing away until I hit the wall. My mind raced, every rational thought drowned out by the pounding of my heart. The footsteps had been real. The handprint was real. Whatever I had severed, it wasn't gone. It was still here. I didn't know what else to do. I grabbed my keys, threw on my coat, and bolted out the front door, leaving the house behind. The cold evening air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the door unlocked. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone standing in the window, watching me leave. But the house was still, its dark windows staring back at me like hollow eyes. I didn't stop driving until I reached the edge of town, the familiar streetlights giving me a fleeting sense of safety. I pulled over, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I was free. At least, that's what I told myself. I checked into a motel that night, a cheap, dingy place that smelled of mildew but felt like a sanctuary. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the knob, and sat on the bed, staring at the book. I didn't dare open it again. The night passed slowly, every creak of the building making my skin crawl. Sleep was out of the question. I spent the hours staring at the walls, my mind racing with thoughts of what had happened and what might still happen. When dawn finally broke, I felt a sliver of relief. The sunlight streaming through the thin curtains felt like a barrier against the darkness, a promise that the worst was behind me. But then I heard it, a faint tapping at the window. My stomach dropped as I turned toward the sound. The curtains were drawn, but the tapping continued, soft and deliberate. Summoning what little courage I had left, I approached the window, my hand trembling as I pulled the curtain aside. There was nothing there, just the empty parking lot, bathed in the golden light of morning. I exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping my lips. I was losing my mind, but as I turned away, I froze. On the inside of the window, faint and smeared, was another handprint. I backed away, my heart pounding, the blood rushing in my ears. The room felt colder now, the air thick with a familiar weight. And then I heard it, a voice, soft and chilling, whispering from the shadows. Asterisk, you can't run. Asterisk. I never went back to the house. I never even went back to the town. I drove until I couldn't drive anymore, leaving everything behind, my belongings, my job, my life. But no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, it's always there. The footsteps, the whispers, the handprints. It's as if the house is following me, its darkness clinging to me like a shadow I can't escape. I don't know how much longer I can live like this. Every day is a battle, every night a nightmare. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, I wonder if I made a mistake. If severing the bridge wasn't the solution. If I was the bridge all along. Story 3. When I first saw the house, it wasn't love at first sight, but it felt like something. A relief, maybe. A step toward starting over. It sat at the end of a quiet street, flanked by gnarled trees that cast long, jagged shadows across the overgrown yard. The kind of house that looked like it had stories to tell, if only you listened hard enough. I was desperate for a fresh start. The divorce had left me in pieces, financially and emotionally. I needed to move somewhere affordable, somewhere far from the memories of my old life. This house checked both boxes, even if it came with creaking floorboards, a roof that sagged in the middle, and windows that seemed to watch me as I stood outside, debating if I should take the plunge. It's got charm, the landlord had said, though the smile on her face didn't quite reach her eyes. A lot of character, perfect for someone like you. I wasn't sure what she meant by that, but I nodded anyway. She slid the lease across the table, before I'd even finished asking questions. No pets, no loud parties. Rent's due on the 1st. Anything else, you can figure out. Her words were rushed, her tone impatient. It felt like she was trying to get rid of me, or get rid of the house. Still, I signed the lease. What choice did I have? It was the only place I could afford, and I needed to move quickly. It's all yours, she said, handing me the keys. Her hand lingered for just a moment too long, her expression unreadable. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside was the smell. A strange mix of damp wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic. The kind of smell that makes you pause, trying to place it. I told myself it was normal for an old house, probably just needed some airing out. The second thing I noticed was the quiet, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind that presses on your ears, making you hyper-aware of every small sound. The house had quirks, sure. The floorboards groaned under my weight, even when I stood still. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The kitchen faucet dripped no matter how tightly I turned the handle. But I told myself it added to the charm. For the first few days, I focused on settling in. Work kept me busy during the day, which was a blessing. At night, I tried to ignore the way the house felt different, like it shifted ever so slightly when the sun went down. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, stretching across the walls like they were alive. The first time I met my neighbor, Mrs. Cartwright, I was dragging a box of books up the porch steps. She appeared out of nowhere, her white hair pulled into a tight bun, her small frame hunched over as if she were carrying a weight no one else could see. "Moving into the old Thompson place, are you?" she asked, her voice sharp but not unkind. Yeah, I said, setting the box down. "It's still work in progress." She chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. That's one way to put it. Not many stick around long enough to finish the work, though. I frowned. "What do you mean?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, nothing. Just stories. People see an old house like that and start imagining things. Makes them jumpy." She paused, her gaze drifting toward the house. "Still, you'd be wise to keep your wits about you." Before I could ask what she meant, she turned and shuffled back toward her house, leaving me standing there with a pit in my stomach. That night, I heard the footsteps for the first time. I was in the kitchen unpacking dishes when the sound stopped me cold. Heavy, deliberate steps moving across the second floor. My heart lodged itself in my throat as I stood there, frozen. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking. The footsteps stopped. Grabbing a knife from the counter, I made my way up the stairs, each creak beneath my feet echoing like a gunshot in the silence. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by the faint glow of the moon through the window at the far end. I checked every room, even the closets. Nothing. But as I stood there, knife clutched tightly in my hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air felt thick, pressing against my skin. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house made me jump, my ears straining to catch any sound that didn't belong. By morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Old houses made noises. It was just part of their charm. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a house settling. Something about this place felt wrong. The second incident happened a few nights later. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when the smell hit me. That same metallic, coppery scent I'd noticed when I first moved in. Only now it was stronger, almost suffocating. I sat up, turning on the lamp beside the bed. The room was empty, but the smell lingered, thick and cloying. I checked the windows, thinking maybe something outside was causing it, but they were all shut tight. That's when I heard the faint whispering. It was so soft, I thought I might be imagining it, but as I held my breath, straining to hear, it grew louder, a low, murmuring sound, like someone speaking just out of earshot. I wanted to leave, to grab my keys and get out of the house, but my legs wouldn't move. I sat there, paralyzed, until the whispering stopped as suddenly as it had started. The next morning, I told myself it was a bad dream, a trick of the mind. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. And then there was the door. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. I was cleaning the living room when I noticed the door to the basement was open. I could have sworn I'd closed it earlier, but maybe I'd forgotten. As I moved to shut it, a chill ran down my spine. The air coming up from the basement was freezing, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. And there was that smell again, stronger than ever. I slammed the door shut and locked it, telling myself I'd deal with whatever was down there another day. But as I turned to walk away, I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks coming from the other side of the door. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. And in the silence that followed, I realized something. I wasn't alone in this house. I didn't go back to the basement door for days. Honestly, I didn't go near it at all. I couldn't bring myself to. Every time I passed it in the hallway, I felt that same icy draft, like the cold was seeping out from under the door, creeping along the floorboards and wrapping itself around my ankles. I told myself it was ridiculous. Basements are cold. Basements smell weird. This wasn't anything new. But the memory of those 3 knocks, those deliberate, measured knocks, sat heavy in my chest. I couldn't explain it, and I sure as hell didn't want to investigate it. So I stayed busy, cleaning, working, organizing. Anything to keep my mind off the creeping unease that seemed to linger in every corner of the house. The days passed without incident, but the nights were another story. It started small. At first, it was just noises. The kind you could explain away if you tried hard enough. A soft creak from the staircase, even though no one was on it. The faint rustle of movement in the attic, even though I hadn't set foot up there since I moved in. But then the whispers came back. It was a Wednesday night, late enough that the world outside was silent, save for the occasional car passing on the street. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to fall asleep. And then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it. That low murmuring sound, like voices speaking in hushed tones. My eyes snapped open, my pulse pounding in my ears. The sound was faint, but it was unmistakable. It was coming from somewhere below me. I lay there, frozen, straining to hear. It didn't sound like words, exactly. More like syllables broken and fragmented, overlapping in a way that didn't make sense. I wanted to believe it was coming from outside, maybe through one of the windows. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The sound was too close, too clear. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening, waiting. But the house was quiet. The next morning, I called a locksmith. I need new locks, I told him when he arrived, gesturing toward the front door. He was a stocky guy in his 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor, the kind of person who looked like he'd seen it all. Trouble with the neighbors, he asked as he worked. his voice casual. "No," I said quickly. "Nothing like that. Just peace of mind, you know?" He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. As he finished up, he glanced around the room. "You're new to town, huh?" "Yeah," I said, avoiding his gaze. He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "This house, you know about it, right?" My stomach tightened. "What about it?" He shrugged, his expression guarded. "People talk, that's all. Used to be a family that lived here a while back. Nice folks by all accounts, but they didn't last long. What happened to them?" He shook his head. "Depends on who you ask. Some say they left in the middle of the night. Didn't even bother packing. Others say, well, people like to make up stories about these old places. You shouldn't pay it any mind." But the way he avoided looking at me as he spoke told me he didn't believe that. That night, I stayed up late, scrolling through local forums and news articles, trying to find anything about the house's history. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. Maybe proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I didn't find much. Just vague mentions of previous tenants leaving abruptly, rumors about strange noises and cold spots. Nothing concrete. Nothing I could use to explain the sense of dread that seemed to hang in the air. It wasn't until I came across an old article from the local paper that I started to piece things together. The headline read, "Asterisk local man declared missing after suspected foul play." Asterisk, the article was dated 15 years ago, and the address listed for the man's last known residence was mine. The details were sparse. The man's name was Benjamin Ford, and he'd been living alone at the time of his disappearance. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises coming from the house in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. Footsteps banging, even screaming. The police had investigated, but they didn't find anything. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of foul play. Benjamin Ford had simply vanished. I stared at the article for a long time, my mind racing. Was it just a coincidence? Maybe, but it didn't feel like one. That night, the noises started again. I was lying in bed, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, when I heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, moving slowly down the hallway outside my room. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was out there. I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, almost soothing. 911. "What's your emergency?" "There's someone in my house," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Are you safe?" she asked. I think so. I'm in my room. The door's locked." "Stay where you are," she said. "Officers are on their way." The footsteps stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear. The silence was deafening. And then, just as suddenly as they had started, the footsteps began again. This time, they were coming toward my door. I clenched the phone in my hand, my pulse racing. "They're coming," I whispered. The operator's voice was calm, but I could hear the urgency beneath it. "Stay on the line. Help is on the way." The footsteps stopped outside my door. For a moment, there was nothing, and then slowly, the doorknob began to turn. The doorknob turned, slowly and deliberately, as if whatever stood on the other side of the door knew I was watching. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, pounding with a rhythm that matched the slow twist of the handle. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone tighter, barely able to speak. "Please," I whispered to the operator, my voice cracking. "Please hurry." The doorknob rattled, and then nothing. Silence. For what felt like an eternity. There was no sound. No footsteps. No creaking floorboards. No knocks or whispers. I couldn't breathe. I dared not move. Not even to check if the door had been fully opened. I was paralyzed. Locked in a moment where time seemed to stretch. Where every second dragged on, suffocating me. Finally, the shrill ring of the doorbell sliced through the silence. It made me jump, my heart leaping into my throat. I quickly shot a glance at the door, where the knob still rested in its locked position. I didn't dare open the door to find out what was on the other side. Instead, I crept to the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the police. But when I looked outside, there was no patrol car, no flashing lights. Just the empty street bathed in the dull glow of a street lamp. I stared at it for a long moment, my brain struggling to make sense of it. Had the operator been wrong? Had someone already come and gone, leaving me to wonder if I'd imagined everything? I checked my phone. The call was still open, the operator's voice faintly crackling in my ear. "Are you there?" she asked, her voice now edged with concern. I swallowed hard, still too scared to move. I don't think anyone's here. Stay inside. Don't open the door unless it's an officer. I nodded, despite knowing she couldn't see me. I won't. I stayed by the window, waiting, listening. It felt like hours passed, though I knew it had only been minutes. When the police finally arrived, they found nothing. The door was locked. The house was secure, and I was left with nothing but my racing heart and a growing sense of dread. I tried to sleep that night, but it was impossible. The house seemed louder than usual. The creaks, the groans, the whispered murmurs that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was like the house was alive, breathing in sync with me, moving and shifting in ways I couldn't explain. I didn't get much rest. I spent the next few days in a daze, constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling the weight of eyes on me, even when I was alone. The house felt heavier, like something was waiting for me to make the next move, to do something that would trigger whatever force had been lurking in the shadows. The rumors and stories about the house had been lingering at the back of my mind, but I couldn't push them away. I needed to know what I was dealing with, needed to understand why the house felt so wrong. That's when I found the journal. It was tucked away in a small compartment in the attic, hidden beneath a pile of old boxes and dust-covered furniture. I wasn't sure why I decided to go up there. Maybe it was the creeping suspicion that I needed to confront whatever was haunting me. Or maybe it was the relentless whispering that seemed to follow me everywhere I went. I pried open the compartment, my hands shaking as I lifted the leather-bound book. It felt old, ancient even, like it had been forgotten for centuries. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink smudged in places where time had taken its toll. I sat on the floor of the attic, dust settling around me as I flipped through the pages. The handwriting was spidery, shaky, as if the writer's hand couldn't keep up with the frantic thoughts pouring out of them. It wasn't until the third or fourth page that I began to make sense of it. The journal belonged to Benjamin Ford, the man who had disappeared 15 years ago. The first entries were mundane, detailing his everyday life, work, bills, interactions with the neighbors. But as the pages turned, the tone shifted. I can hear it now. The footsteps at night. They echo through the halls, just like they said they would. I thought it was just my imagination, but it's not. It's real. It's coming from the basement. I can feel it in my bones. The next entry was even more disturbing. I've been trying to figure it out. The house, there's something about it. I think it was built on something old. I'm going to try something tonight. Something from the old rituals. I need to see if I can reach it. Maybe I can make it go away. The rest of the pages were a jumble of nonsensical phrases and cryptic notes. References to rituals, to doors, to things that shouldn't be spoken of. But there was one line that sent a chill through my body. One line that seemed to confirm all my worst fears. It's not just a house. It's me. I've opened something, and now it's coming for me. I slammed the journal shut, the weight of its words sinking into my gut like a stone. The air in the attic grew cold, and for the first time, I understood what he meant. The house wasn't just creaking. It wasn't just settling. It was waiting. I couldn't escape the feeling that everything I'd read in that journal was slowly suffocating me. The words haunted me, echoing through my mind, drowning out all rational thought. I wanted to dismiss it as the ramblings of a man driven mad by fear, but there was a part of me, the part that felt the cold air seeping from the basement, that knew there was truth in his words. It was as if the house had sensed my hesitation, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself fully. And the more I resisted, the stronger the pull became. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards felt like a warning. The house was shifting, moving, as though it were alive and aware of me, watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. By morning, the house was quieter, but it wasn't the comfortable quiet of a home settling at rest. It was a tense, suffocating silence, like the calm before a storm. I spent the day trying to distract myself, running errands, making phone calls, anything to keep my mind off the darkness that had overtaken my thoughts. But even when I was outside, I felt the weight of the house pressing on me. It was as if it were calling me back. I couldn't escape it. That night, I went back to the basement. I didn't want to, not at all, but there was a part of me that knew I had no choice. The house had made it clear that it wouldn't let me leave without confronting whatever it had been hiding. The basement door was still there, exactly as it had been before, but this time I didn't hesitate. I turned the knob. The cold hit me immediately, much stronger than before. It wrapped around me like a thick fog, making it hard to breathe. The faint smell of mildew and something metallic filled the air, and I felt my stomach turn. But I pressed on, down the creaky steps, deeper into the house's belly. The basement was darker than I remembered. The single light bulb hanging from the ceiling did little to chase away the shadows that seemed to linger in every corner. The walls were covered in dark stains, and the floor was littered with broken crates and discarded furniture. But there was something else. At the far end of the basement, barely visible in the dim light, I could see the outline of something against the wall. A shape, something unnatural, standing still as if it had been waiting for me. I took a step forward, and then another. My heart raced, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what it was. As I approached, the air grew colder still, and the whispers, those low, unintelligible murmurs, returned. This time, they were louder, clearer, almost as if they were coming from behind me. My neck prickled with a sudden, overwhelming sense of danger. I turned around, expecting to see something standing there, but there was nothing. The basement was empty. I exhaled shakily and turned back toward the shape. And then I saw it. A door. Not a regular door, though. This one was different. Old, carved with symbols and markings that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. It was half hidden behind a stack of old crates, but it was there, and it looked like it had always been there, waiting for me to find it. The moment my hand touched the handle, I felt a surge of cold energy. A rush of fear shot through me, and I yanked my hand away as if the door had burned me. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. The journal, Benjamin's words, the whispers, it all led to this. I reached for the handle again, this time with more determination. It turned easily in my grasp, the door creaking open with a low groan, as if it were reluctant to allow me passage. What lay beyond was not what I had expected. The room on the other side was small and cramped, barely larger than a closet, but it was what was in the center of the room that caught my attention. A circle, drawn on the floor in dark, stained chalk. The symbols were almost identical to the ones on the door, and at the center of the circle lay an object, a small blackened idol, chipped and cracked with age. I stepped closer, and the air grew heavier, colder. The whispers were louder now, sharper, like voices trying to push their way through the walls. I bent down to pick up the idol, but the moment my fingers brushed its surface, the room seemed to shudder. The air thickened and the temperature plummeted. A voice, low and guttural, whispered from behind me, "You shouldn't have opened it." I spun around, my breath caught in my throat, but there was no one there, only the empty shadows. And then the floor beneath me cracked. I fell to my knees, my body jolting in pain as the ground shifted beneath me. The circle on the floor began to glow faintly, and the air was filled with a deep, otherworldly hum. I scrambled to my feet, but the shadows around me began to stretch, grow, twisting like tendrils of darkness. reaching for me. The whispers grew louder, filling my ears with their maddening chant. The room was alive. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing with the same rhythm as the whispers. I was trapped. I tried to run, but something was holding me back. Something invisible but strong, pressing me down. The idol was in my hand now, its surface slick with a strange, wet substance. I could feel its power coursing through me, forcing me to stay. That's when I saw it, a figure, standing in the corner of the room, barely visible in the shadows. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its form was tall, thin, almost human, but not quite. It stepped forward, and the air grew even colder. I could hear its breathing now, ragged and slow. The whispers intensified, surrounding me, drowning me. "You open the door," the figure whispered, its voice chilling and hollow. "And now it's time to pay." I screamed. I don't know how long I stood there, trembling in the dark, clutching that idol in my hand like it could somehow protect me. My chest felt tight, as if the very air was being sucked from the room, leaving me gasping for breath. The figure, if it could even be called that, moved closer, its long, bony limbs gliding through the shadows. I couldn't move. I was frozen, caught in its gaze, unable to tear my eyes away from its glowing, hollow sockets. It didn't speak anymore, but I felt its presence press against me, pushing me down, dragging me into its world. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My thoughts were a tangled mess of fear, desperation, and confusion. The whispers swirled around me, now louder, more insistent. They were no longer words I could understand, but an endless, guttural chant that seemed to come from every corner of the room, every shadow. My skin crawled, and the floor beneath me felt as though it were shifting, becoming unstable, as if the very ground I stood on was no longer real. The figure reached out, its long fingers just inches from my face. I shut my eyes, bracing myself for whatever it was about to do to me. But then the room shifted. The air grew warmer. The shadows pulled back, and the oppressive weight lifted. When I opened my eyes again, the figure was gone. I was alone in the room. For a moment, I couldn't comprehend what had just happened. It was as if everything I had felt, the fear, the terror, the presence, had been a dream. The room was the same as it had been before, dim and filled with the cold, stale air of the basement. But something had changed. I stumbled backward, my heart racing as I clutched the idol in my hand, still slick with the strange substance. The symbols on the floor, the circle, were still there, but now they seemed to pulse faintly, as if the very room itself was alive, breathing in time with the idol in my hand. I had opened something. The house had been waiting for me to find it, and now there was no going back. I didn't know what I had unleashed, but I knew it was far worse than I could have ever imagined. I left the basement, my legs weak and unsteady beneath me. The whispers didn't stop. They followed me up the stairs, murmuring just out of reach, just loud enough to keep me on edge. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw it. The front door was wide open. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't even moved from the basement. Yet there it was, standing open, the night air spilling in. The street outside was as quiet as ever, the same dull glow of the street lamp illuminating the empty road. But something felt wrong. The silence outside was too still, too unnatural. It was as if the world itself had stopped moving. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the door. And then, from behind me, I heard it again. The footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, slow. They came from the hallway behind me, each step seeming to echo through the house, reverberating off the walls. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, expecting to see something. But there was nothing. No figure, no shadows moving, no strange presence. Just the empty hallway. The creaking floorboards seemed to settle under my feet, the house as still as it had been moments before. It was then that I realized whatever had been haunting this place wasn't tied to one single spot. It had followed me, It had been waiting for me to open the door, to let it in. The house was no longer just a house. It was alive. I ran. I didn't stop to grab anything. I didn't care about the journal or the idol or the house itself. I needed to get out, to escape, before whatever was lurking inside could claim me too. But as I reached the door, the temperature dropped once more. I didn't look back. I ran through the door and didn't stop, my breath coming in quick, panicked bursts as I fled down the stairs and into the street. The street lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch after me, following me as I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest neighbor's house, pounding on the door with frantic desperation. They let me in, confused and concerned, but I didn't stay to explain. I couldn't. The only thing that mattered was that I was out. I was safe, at least for now. I thought I had escaped the house, but I was wrong. That night, as I tried to sleep in the guest room of my neighbor's home, I heard it again. The footsteps, heavy and slow, just outside the window. They were coming for me. The footsteps didn't stop. They never did. I spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, my eyes wide open, straining to hear any sounds that might tell me what was happening. My body was stiff with fear, and even though I was no longer in that house, the weight of it hung over me. The walls of the guest room felt like they were closing in, and the faint whispers, those low murmurs, lingered in the back of my mind. The noises continued for hours, echoing through the quiet night. The steady thud of footsteps, slow and deliberate, always the same rhythm. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down I knew it wasn't. When morning came, I tried to shake off the fear. I forced myself to get up, to act normal, to pretend I hadn't spent the night with one eye on the door and the other on the window. But it wasn't easy. The more I tried to forget, the more I felt the weight of the house on my chest. The events from the night before played over and over in my head, like a broken record, repeating the same terrifying moment when I had opened that door, that forbidden door. I couldn't stop thinking about the idol, the way it had felt in my hand, slick with something unnatural, the way the room had shifted around me. I knew I had to return. I had to go back to the house, but the thought of it made my stomach turn. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay away, to keep running. Yet something deeper inside me, something I couldn't explain, drove me to go back. I had to know what had happened. I had to understand what was going on. I waited until nightfall, when the house was quiet again, when the street outside was empty and still. I made my decision. I drove back to the house. The street lights flickered as I pulled up, casting long shadows that twisted and curled around my car. The house loomed in the distance, its windows dark, its silhouette like a jagged, broken tooth against the night sky. It was just as I remembered, just as wrong. I parked across the street, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I stared at the house for what felt like an eternity, unable to make myself move. But I knew I had no choice. I had to go inside. The door was locked when I approached, but it didn't matter. The house always let me in. I turned the handle, and it opened easily, as if it had been expecting me. The air inside was thick, heavy with the same oppressive cold that had greeted me the last time. I stepped inside, but this time there was no hesitation. I knew what I was looking for. I knew I had to find a basement. The house creaked around me, groaning as though it were alive, shifting with every step I took. The floorboards underfoot seemed to whisper, their creaks becoming louder with each passing moment. I made my way to the basement door, my heart pounding with each step, but this time it didn't feel like I was being pulled toward it. No, this time. I felt as if I was being dragged, forced into the darkness by something I couldn't escape. I opened the door, and the cold hit me again. It was worse than before. The air was thick with the same metallic scent, but now it was stronger, sharper. It filled my lungs as I descended the stairs, each step seeming to vibrate with the low hum of something beneath the floor. And then I saw it, the circle. It was there, just as it had been before, drawn on the floor in dark chalk, the symbols still faintly glowing. But this time, they weren't just faint. They burned with an intensity one hadn't seen before. I approached the center, my hands shaking, the idol still clutched tightly in my grip. The whispers filled the room again, louder this time, like they were coming from all directions. "You shouldn't have come back," they hissed. "You shouldn't have opened it." I froze, looking around, my eyes darting through the shadows. But this time, I wasn't alone. The figure emerged from the darkness, its form now clearer, more distinct. Its tall, thin body stretched unnaturally, its arms too long, its fingers curled in a way that didn't look human. Its eyes, those glowing empty sockets, locked onto mine, and I felt the blood drain from my face. "You thought you could escape," it whispered, its voice like 100 voices layered on top of each other. "But it's never over. You opened the door, and now you belong to us." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, to escape, but the figure moved faster than I could comprehend. It was on me in an instant, its cold hands grabbing hold of my arms, its fingers digging into my skin. I tried to pull away, but it held me tight, its grip like iron. The idol burned in my hand, a searing heat radiating from it. And then everything went dark. I don't remember when I lost consciousness. Maybe it was the moment the figure's hands closed around my wrists, or maybe it was the unbearable heat from the idol. All I know is that the world around me seemed to blur, spinning into a chaotic whirl of shadows and whispers. When I came to, I was no longer in the basement. I sat up, blinking, my head pounding. The air around me was stale and thick, much like the basement, but something about it felt different. I was no longer on the cold concrete floor, but on something soft, something that shifted beneath me. I tried to push myself up, but my body refused to cooperate. The dizziness made it hard to focus, and I had to steady myself, grabbing hold of whatever surface was near. The room, if it could even be called a room, was dark. The only light came from an eerie, dim glow, flickering from somewhere deeper in the space. My breath hitched as I realized I was not alone. The air seemed to move around me, breathing alive. The walls of the room shifted, pulsating, stretching in and out, as though the very building itself was alive. I could hear the whispers again, louder this time, clearer. "They are coming," they said. "It's too late. You can't escape." I tried to stand, but my legs trembled beneath me, as if they didn't have the strength to hold me up. I wasn't sure where I was, or how I had gotten here. The last thing I remembered was the figure, its dark eyes staring into mine as the world turned to black. My breath quickened. Had I died? Was I in some twisted version of hell? I wasn't sure if the house was playing tricks on me, but everything around me felt wrong, unnatural. The floor beneath me wasn't wood or stone. It was soft, almost like wet earth, and it squelched beneath my feet as I moved, sending an icy chill up my spine. Then I heard the sound, a low, grating noise, like something dragging across the floor. It was coming closer, the sound growing louder with each passing second. I froze. I didn't want to look, but I had no choice. I turned slowly, the dark shadows in the room stretching out like claws. And then I saw it. The figure was back. It wasn't just one figure, though. It was an entire mass of them, shadowy, distorted shapes, each one twisted and broken in its own way. They weren't human anymore. Their bodies were contorted, their faces distorted with agony. Their eyes, those cold, lifeless eyes, locked onto me as they drew closer. "Help us," one of them whispered. "You opened the door. Now you must stay." I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. "No!" I gasped, but my voice sounded distant, hollow. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to get out. "Please." But they didn't listen. They kept coming, their movements jerky and erratic, as if they were tethered to some invisible force pulling them forward. The air around me grew colder, the shadows darker, as though the house itself was feeding off my fear. I had to get out, but there was nowhere to go. The walls seemed to close in, the space shrinking around me. Every step I took, every movement I made, only seemed to make the shadows press in tighter. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The whispers grew louder, frantic, as though the spirits in the room were desperate for something I couldn't understand. One of the figures reached out, its long, twisted fingers brushing against my skin. I recoiled, but it was too late. The cold from its touch sank deep into my bones, freezing me in place. I felt my body go numb, my limbs unresponsive. The shadows closed around me, pressing in on all sides. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything stopped. The shadows receded. The whispers faded. The room, if it could even be called that, was empty. I was alone again. I looked around disoriented. The walls no longer moved. The floor was solid beneath me. The light from the eerie glow flickered dimly, casting long, jagged shadows across the room. I didn't know how I had survived. I didn't know why they had let me go. But something had changed. I wasn't the same person who had walked into the house. Whatever had been waiting for me inside, whatever I had opened, had marked me, and I could feel it deep inside me, like an invisible weight pressing against my chest. I had become part of the house. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to accept it, but there was no denying it. The house had claimed me, and there was no escaping it. I tried to move toward the door, but the moment my hand touched the handle, I froze. Behind me, I could hear the faint sound of footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, heavy. They were coming. And this time, I knew they weren't going to stop until I was part of the house forever. I couldn't breathe. My chest was constricted, my heart hammering in my ribs as the footsteps grew closer. I turned slowly, my hand still on the door handle, my fingers numb from fear. The room, if I could even call it a room anymore, seemed to bend, warp, as though the walls themselves were alive, watching me, waiting. I couldn't explain it, but everything felt wrong. The very air seemed to press in on me from all sides. The darkness stretched further, the shadows growing longer, their fingers inching closer, reaching for me. I had to leave, but the door wouldn't open. I yanked on the handle again, my breath ragged, the panic rising inside me. No matter how hard I pulled, the door wouldn't budge. It was as if the house itself had sealed me in, trapping me, ensuring that I couldn't escape. The footsteps grew louder. Closer, the first figure emerged from the shadows, its twisted form crawling out of the darkness, like a nightmare made flesh. Its limbs were too long, its body too thin, its face, if you could even call it a face, was a grotesque mask of suffering. I staggered back, my hands gripping the door, trying to pull it open with all my strength, but it was no use. The figure inched closer, its eyes, those empty, hollow sockets, never leaving mine. "You can't leave," it whispered, its voice like sandpaper scraping against stone. "You open the door. Now you must pay." My body trembled, my mind struggling to process the words. What did it mean by pay? Another figure joined the first, then another, until they were surrounding me, their twisted bodies pressing in from all sides. The air grew colder with each passing second, and I could feel the temperature dropping rapidly, my breath coming out in visible clouds. I tried to scream, but my throat was tight, choked by the fear that had settled deep within me. Then I heard it, the faintest scraping sound, like nails against wood. My heart skipped a beat as I turned toward the source of the noise. The shadows in the corner of the room shifted, and someone was standing there. The figure was tall, too tall, and its limbs stretched unnaturally long. It didn't move, just stood there, watching me, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't look away. The room seemed to grow smaller. the shadows suffocating. The whispers were deafening now, swirling around me like a storm. Too many voices, too many demands. Join us, they chanted. Stay with us. Forever. I recoiled, my hand still locked around the door handle. But it didn't matter. The figures were everywhere, surrounding me, closing in, their empty eyes hungry, their twisted faces locked in expressions of eternal pain. I had made a mistake. I had thought I could control this, that I could simply walk away from the house, from whatever I had opened. But I was wrong. The house had been waiting for someone like me, someone desperate enough, curious enough, to break its rules. And now, it had me. I wasn't going to make it out, but I had to try. I pushed against the door again, my legs shaking, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The door finally gave, just a little, but it was enough. I squeezed through the crack, the cold air hitting me like a wave as I shoved my way out. But the moment I stepped through the threshold, I felt it, the pull. Something was yanking me back, pulling me toward the darkness. The figures didn't follow me, but I could hear their whispers, their laughter, echoing through the house, as though they were still there, watching, waiting. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care where I was going or how far I had to run. I just had to get away from the house, from them, from whatever had been awakened. But no matter how fast I ran, no matter how far I pushed myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were right behind me. The house was never far. The shadows were always there, just out of sight, following me, waiting for me to slip up. I didn't know how much time had passed when I finally stopped, out of breath, my body aching from the strain. I was on a street I didn't recognize, in a neighborhood I had never seen before. The air was still cold, and the streetlights flickered above me, casting long shadows on the ground. I didn't know if I had truly escaped. I didn't know if I ever would. All I knew was that the house had left its mark on me, and no matter where I went, I would never be free of it. The house was never far. I hadn't realized it at first, the creeping dread that followed me wherever I went. At first, I thought I was simply shaken from the ordeal, the fear, the panic, the impossible things I had witnessed. But as the days passed, I couldn't ignore it. The sensation, like invisible chains, pulling at my chest, a constant weight I could never shake. I tried to go back to normal. I tried to force myself to live, to wake up each morning, go to work, talk to people like everything was fine. But I couldn't stop the feeling that the house was watching me, that it was always there, lurking just behind the corners of my mind, waiting to pull me back in. The dreams didn't help. Every night, without fail, I found myself back in that house. The creaking floors, the cold air, the whispers, the figures. They didn't speak to me in the dreams. They didn't need to. I could feel them, their presence, a constant pressure in the darkness. They didn't move or touch me. They didn't need to. I could feel their hunger, their thirst for something I couldn't name. And then, one night, something happened. I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The room was silent. The air was thick. But the whisper was there. Not in my dreams. Not in my mind. In the room. It was soft at first, just a murmur. But as I sat up, my eyes darting around the dark room, the whisper grew louder. You can't escape. I froze, my blood running cold. The voice was deep, distorted, like it came from somewhere far away, but it was unmistakable. It was the same voice I had heard in the house. The one that spoke when I tried to leave, the one that warned me of the price. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my heart in my throat, my entire body trembling. The whisper continued. Come back. You open the door. You belong to us now. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if it was pressing down on me from all sides. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. And then the cold. It was sudden. It rushed into the room, freezing the very air around me, the hairs on my neck standing on end. The shadows in the corners of the room grew darker, deeper, as if something was emerging from them. I glanced over my shoulder and I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the bed, its face obscured in shadow. But I knew it was one of them. I could feel it, that same dread, that same hunger. "Please," I whispered, my voice weak. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. It reached out, its fingers long and twisted, but this time it didn't touch me. No, it simply hovered over me, the cold emanating from its form. It was so close. I could feel the air around me ripple as it moved, as if it were drawing closer. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. "You'll never be free," the figure whispered. The words burned into my mind. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to make it stop. But then a thought hit me, a memory, a scrap of something from that first night in the house. The idol, the door. I had opened it. I had let them in. That was it. The house hadn't just been haunted. It had been a gateway, a door to something else. And I had opened it. I didn't know how to close it, but I knew I had to try. I bolted out of bed, stumbling in the dark, searching frantically for anything that might help. My hands brushed against the walls, the cold seeping through the thin plaster. The whispers were louder now. They filled the room, echoing in my head, but I didn't stop. I ran down the stairs, out into the street, not caring if anyone saw me, not caring about anything but escaping. The night was cold, but I didn't feel it. My skin was numb, my body on autopilot as I rushed forward. I had to get to the house. The house was the key. I didn't know how I knew it. I didn't know why, but it was the only thing that made sense. I had to go back. I had to close the door. I don't remember how I got to the house. The streets blurred past me, my footsteps ringing out in the stillness of the night. My mind was consumed with a singular thought: get to the house. Everything else felt like a distant echo. By the time I stood in front of the old house again, I was shaking uncontrollably. The memories flooded back, dark, suffocating, terrifying. The basement, the idol, the figures. But now, they seemed like something worse than mere memories. They were living things, waiting for me. I stared at the house for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. It was silent, as it always had been, but it felt alive, as though the house itself was aware of my presence, aware of what I had come to do. The door was shut. I tried the handle. It was locked. Of course, it was locked. I didn't hesitate. My hands trembled as I pulled out the spare key I had found hidden beneath the rotting flower pot in the garden. The key was cold to the touch, as if it, too, had been waiting for me to return. With a soft click, the door creaked open. The house welcomed me back with a gust of cold air. The stale, musty scent of old wood and damp stone filled my lungs, but this time it wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight as I moved deeper into the house. The silence was oppressive, but I could feel it. Beneath the quiet, something was stirring. Something was waiting for me. The house felt different now. It felt more to wear. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift, and the temperature dropped, as if the house was breathing in time with me. I reached the stairs, the ones I had once climbed with the foolish belief that I could escape. But now I knew better. There would be no escape this time. The staircase felt steeper, more daunting than before. I didn't dare to look back as I ascended, though I could feel the oppressive weight of the house pressing in behind me. Every step I took felt like a step closer to something worse than death. At the top of the stairs, the door to the basement lay just ahead. I paused, my hand hovering over the handle. But I could feel the pull, like the house was calling me, urging me to enter. I had to finish what I had started. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob and opened the door. The basement was just as I remembered it. Cold, dark, and damp. The faint smell of mildew filled my nostrils. and I could hear the creaking of the old pipes in the walls. The walls felt closer now, like they were slowly closing in. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath fogging in the air. But it wasn't just the cold. It was something else. Something darker. I could hear the whispers again. They were faint at first, barely audible, but they grew louder with every step I took. And this time, they weren't just whispers. They were words. Words I couldn't understand, yet they felt like a weight on my chest. Come closer, they beckoned. The door is open. Come closer. I gritted my teeth and forced myself to move forward. I couldn't stop now. The basement stretched out before me, its corners swallowed in shadows. But in the center, where the old idol had once stood, there was nothing, just an empty space, except the floor. The floor had changed. It wasn't wood anymore. It was something else, something dark, something alive. I stepped closer, my feet sinking slightly into the floorboards, as if the house were trying to claim me. The whispers were louder now, urgent. Don't you see, they cried. You can't undo what's been done. You can't stop it. I didn't know if I was talking to the house, to the spirits, or to myself. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the journal, the one I had taken from the attic weeks ago, the journal that had described the rituals, the door, the curse. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking, until I found the page I was looking for. It was covered in strange symbols, some drawn hastily, others carefully written as if the author had been in a rush or desperate. The words were the same ones I had heard in the house, the ones that spoke to me in the night, the ones that promised there would be no escape. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. The journal mentioned rituals, ancient rites to close the door, but it was too late for that. I had opened it, and now it was part of me. Suddenly, the floor beneath me cracked. I looked down in horror as it would split open, revealing a hole. Blackness poured from it, a swirling mass of shadows and cold. And from the hole, a figure began to rise. It wasn't like the others. It was bigger, more powerful. It had no face, no features, just an endless void of darkness where its eyes should have been. But I could feel it, feel its hunger, and it was coming for me. I tried to back away, but the floor was crumbling beneath me. The shadows rose higher, faster, swallowing everything in their path. I was trapped. I couldn't escape. Chapter 11. The Abyss Calls. I could feel it, the darkness rising around me, pulling me in, suffocating me. My breath quickened, panic clawing at my chest as I stumbled backward, my legs tangled in the crumbling floor. I wanted to scream, to run, but the shadows were closing in too fast, swirling and writhing, consuming everything in their path. The figure, if you could even call it that, was growing. It towered over me now, its form still formless, just a void of blackness, but its presence was overwhelming. It wasn't just the cold that gripped me now, it was its hunger. I could feel it, this ancient, insatiable desire to pull me into the darkness, to swallow me whole. I backed away, my hands bracing against the cold, wet walls, trying to hold on to something, anything. But there was nothing solid left. The house, the floor, even the air itself seemed to bend and twist as the shadows consumed it. My mind raced. I thought of the journal, of the symbols, of the rituals that might have sealed this place away. But it was too late. The house had already claimed me, had already opened the door, and now it was pulling me into the abyss I had invited. The whispers were deafening now, their voices louder than the thundering of my heart. "Join us," they hissed. "You open the door. You belong to us now." I tried to move, to get away from the shadows, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The cold was too much. It burned my skin, froze my bones. The house, no, the thing inside the house had taken control. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was a living, breathing entity, one that fed on my fear, my desperation. I could feel it crawling up my spine, a coldness seeping into my skin. The floor beneath me was no longer solid. It was shifting, moving, like I was sinking into it. I was sinking into it. And then I felt a presence behind me. A hand, long, cold, and twisted, gripped my shoulder. I turned, and there it was, the figure. Closer than ever before, its face still a black void, but now I could feel it. I could feel its eyes on me, watching me, waiting. You cannot fight it. The voice echoed in my mind impossibly deep, as if it was coming from everywhere at once. It's already inside you. The house has marked you. You will never leave. I gasped for air, struggling to break free, but the hand that held me was unyielding. It tightened its grip, and I could feel my breath slowing, my vision blurring. I thought I would die then. I thought this was it. I had come back to the house to end it, to close the door I had opened, but instead, I had sealed my fate. But then, a voice broke through the suffocating darkness. No, it was faint, fragile, like a whisper on the wind, but it was there. A woman's voice, trembling but steady. No, I turned my head, barely able to make out the figure standing at the edge of the room. A woman, pale, almost ghostly, her eyes wide with fear. Her clothes were old, tattered, and she looked as though she had been here for a very long time. You have to listen, she urged, her voice growing stronger. You can't stay. It'll take you forever. The figure behind me, the darkness that had me trapped, turned to face her, but the woman didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her feet barely touching the floor, her body moving with a sense of urgency, as though she had been waiting for this moment. It's not too late, she said, her voice barely above a whisper now. You can still escape. Close the door before it's too late. I didn't know if I could. I didn't know if I had the strength to fight back against the shadow, against the house that had consumed everything in its wake. But I had no choice. I had no choice but to try. With every ounce of willpower I had left, I broke free from the figure's grasp. The shadows recoiled for a moment, as if surprised by my defiance, but I didn't hesitate. I bolted toward the stairwell, ignoring the way the floor seemed to pull me down. The woman's voice echoed in my mind. Hurry! I reached the stairs, the air thick with cold, but I kept going. I had to reach the basement. I had to close the door. I was almost there when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing behind me. The darkness was following me, chasing me, but I couldn't look back. I couldn't. I reached the door at the foot of the stairs and flung it open. The shadows roared in fury, their whispers turning into howls of rage. But I didn't stop. I ran down the stairs into the basement, my feet slipping on the slick stone, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached the idol, the cursed symbol that had started all of this. I grabbed it, its cold surface seeping into my skin, and I screamed in terror, screamed in defiance. I could feel the darkness closing in. I could feel it reaching for me. And then, with all the strength I could muster, I threw the idol into the hole. The shadows shrieked as the idol fell, its fall slow and deliberate, like time itself had stretched. And when it hit the ground, the world seemed to shudder. The air grew still. The whispers stopped. The darkness retreated. The house groaned, as if it were waking up from a long slumber. The shadows began to recede, the walls breathing again, and the oppressive cold started to lift. I didn't wait. I didn't care if it was over. I just ran. I ran through the house, out the door, into the night. But even as I ran, even as I fled into the cold, I could still feel it, the pull, the lingering presence of the house, the door, the shadow. I wasn't free. I would never be free. I couldn't remember how I made it out of the house. The streets blurred past me. The houses around me nothing more than distorted shapes in the darkness. I wasn't sure if I was awake, if any of it had been real. The coldness still clung to me, the shadows lurking just at the edge of my vision. I thought I had escaped, but the feeling, the sensation that I was still being watched, still being followed, never left. The next day, I tried to go on with my life. I tried to pretend that nothing had happened, that the house had just been an old, creaky thing that played tricks on my mind. But every corner I turned, every quiet moment when the world slowed down, I felt it. The shadows. I heard the whispers again that night, soft, faint, but unmistakable. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, but no. The voice, it wasn't just in my head. It was real. Come back. The words sent a chill down my spine. I tried to ignore it, to push it away, but the pull was getting stronger. I couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe without feeling that constant weight on my chest. The house, the darkness, was still with me. I tried to forget. I tried to live my life, but something was different. The world didn't feel the same anymore. It was as if I had crossed some threshold, and now, the line between the living and the dead was blurred. The house had marked me, and it wasn't finished with me yet. I visited the house again, not out of curiosity, but out of a deep, suffocating need. I don't know why I went back. Maybe I thought I could destroy it. Maybe I thought I could prove to myself that it was over. But when I stood in front of it, the house was silent. Its windows, dark and empty, seemed to mock me. I tried the door. It opened without resistance. Inside, it was exactly as it had been. The shadows still clinging to the corners, the floorboards groaning with each step I took. But it wasn't the same house. No, it was a watching, waiting. I walked through the rooms, the air thick with something unspoken. I was drawn to the basement again, my feet moving on their own, guiding me to the very place I had tried to escape. The basement door was open this time. I stepped down into the cold, into the darkness that had once nearly swallowed me whole. But it wasn't empty. The figure stood in the center of the room, its faceless void staring at me. The shadows twisted and wriggled around it like snakes, coiling tighter, pulling me in. "Join us," it said, its voice a low, rumbling growl that filled the room. I felt the walls closing in, the air growing colder, the darkness thickening around me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to run, but it was too late. I was already lost. The figure reached out, its cold fingers brushing against my skin. The touch was enough to freeze me, to paralyze me in place. I could feel it inside me, its presence, its hunger, its promise of endless torment. And then the whispers filled my mind, louder than ever before. You can never leave. The house had won. It had taken me, body and soul, and there would be no escape. I was part of it now, bound by the darkness that lived within its walls. But as I was consumed by the shadow, I thought I heard something. A voice, faint but clear. Not yet. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know if I was still alive, or if I had already crossed into some twisted version of reality. But I knew one thing for certain. The house was still out there, waiting for the next person to open the door, waiting for someone else to join it. And it would never, ever be done